Здоровенькие ребята, вы на канале FORDMAC. Ну что же, большой ролик, посвященный Archie Сонику, что никто вам не расскажет про Archie Соника. И комиксы от издательства я читал очень мало, знаком разве что с парочкой сюжетов, однако слышал, что многие не очень-то и лестно отзываются о данной серии, что очень много отсебятины, многие сюжеты абсолютно бредовейшие, еще попытка намешать адвенчеров с вселенной старых мультсериалов. Короче говоря, давайте уж узнаем поподробнее, что же там не так. Поехали!
I remember it well. I was a young boy, hanging out at a friend's house, when I saw it there. Sitting on his shelf was an image that is now seared into my brain. The cover art of a DVD sleeve for the Sonic the Hedgehog box set. I remember the thought I had as I looked at it and soaked it all in. Hey, is that girl naked? I receive a message from a stranger named Ian. They ask me if I want to be part of a retrospective they're working on about the Archie Sonic comics. Outside of him sending me random screenshots and brief interactions, I know nothing about this comic, but it sounds interesting. I tell him that I'll need to read the comic myself first, though that will take some time. He says that he's perfectly fine with waiting. Time passes, and this event moves to the back of my mind. I receive another message from Ian. It's been years, but once I see his name, I remember. This is that Sonic guy, the one
Охренеть, 3 года прошло.
where plans never came to fruition. He asks if I'm still up for it. And I say yes, which is really odd. Sonic stories have never been the thing that draws me to this franchise. Growing up, the gameplay was what captivated me, and that's remained Sonic's main appeal ever since, which is why I didn't even make a passing mention of the stories in any of my prior Sonic.
Да, в принципе, как у большинства, многие в основном Соника знают именно больше по его геймплею. Да, есть, конечно, люди, которые очень любят его сюжет, но, честно, вот лично вот с моей точки зрения, как-то, знаете, геймплей больше подкупал к тому, чтобы, знаете, постоянно возвращаться к Сонику, чем его истории. Нет, конечно, там были исключения в виде шикарных историй, действительно классных, приятных сюжетов. Но все-таки, если спросить у большинства людей по Сонику, то многие сразу скажут скоростной геймплей. Опять же, может быть, я ошибаюсь, напишите в комментариях, скажите, какое у вас восприятие по этому поводу. Будет приятно почитать.
Videos. For better or worse, they just aren't something that's ever been on my radar, at least as far as seriously considering and critiquing them is concerned. Besides that, there's the fact that the Archie Sonic the Hedgehog comic is big, like really big. Running from 1992 to 2017, it's well over 500 issues long with loads of spin-offs and side stories to call its own. And I've got videos to make and cats to feed, so this big commitment, this thing that I'd be chipping away at for a long time, it was quite the project to agree to. And yet, I still told the stranger that I'd do it. After all, he'd waited 3 years for me to read this thing. He even provided a comprehensive reading guide, link in the description. And if there's one thing I'm not, it's wise with my decision making. So I was in. Now, the Archie Sonic comics aren't exactly unknown, of course, but looking into things a bit more, I found the wider discussion of the series to be...
Как же варьировалась рисовка еще в зависимости от кучи разных авторов. Это, конечно, пиздец. Вот серьезно, смотришь на некоторые из артов и их довольно специфические моменты, и как-то...
somewhat strange. Mostly, it's been reduced to a meme footnote in Sonic history. At first glance, that makes sense. A lot of weird stuff happens in these comics, but the further I read and the more of this story I experienced, the more I realized that I couldn't pull myself away. By the time I finished making my way through, I'd found a story with a unique appeal that I've never seen anyone else truly dive into.
Опа, то есть Fight for Freedom? Получается, что Арчи комиксы дожили до эпохи Sonic Forces? Ну да, получается, примерно до того времени.
Actually, that means that I had to talk about it. You people need to know. So join me through part 1, which will cover over 100 issues as I tell the tale of the Sonic comic that I loved, that I hated, that at times left me speechless. I hope you'll stick with me till the end. Trust me, it'll be quite the journey. So without further ado, let's juice and jam.
I got one more thing to do. Meet you guys at the usual. Got it, juice?
The Sonic the Hedgehog 1993 cartoon aired at a common time for children to watch their tunes. Saturday morning, and it's due to that simple fact that fans have come to refer to it as Sonic Sat AM. Many remember it fondly for its more serious tone. I mean, in the first episode, this old member of the Freedom Fighters just seems to die because the others couldn't save him in time. So yeah, serious, especially when compared to its much sillier sibling, The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. That's where those Sonic Says PSAs come from, so that should give you a pretty good idea of what the show's kinda like.
I'm scared, Sonic. I know I should have obeyed that no flying sign. What's the judge gonna do to me? No flying for a whole month.
Look at the bright side, Tails. It could have been worse.
Anyway, these two shows started
Одного не могу понять, почему их выпускали в одно и то же время. Вот какого хрена? Я бы понял, если бы, знаете, между ними прошел бы годик-полтора. Но, блядь, как? Как, блин?
running around the same time. So when Sonic decided to branch out and make a comic book series with the Archie comics,
было бы аналогично тому, если бы Sonic Boom и Sonic X показывали бы одновременно.
Ну да, это было бы безумно.
they had two wildly different interpretations to base their series on. So, which did they choose? Well, the lush world of Mobius has been ravaged by Dr. Robotnik. Nothing will stop him in his quest to destroy the environment and turn all...
Вот у этой вариации Эгмана из Adventures, у этих интерпретаций есть фанаты.
Ну, окей. Опять же, каждому свое.
of its animal inhabitants into mindless machines through the roboticizer. But there is one obstacle in his path: the Freedom Fighters. This brave group consists of none other than the hero himself, Sonic the Hedgehog, along with his baby bro sidekick, Tails the Fox. However, there are many more who join him. There's Bunny Rabbit, a half-roboticized rabbit with a southern accent. Antoine, a cowardly coyote with a French accent. This guy, a walrus mechanic who helps keep things running. Nicole, an
Ну, я не понимаю, почему многие забывают про него. Ротор прикольный чел.
artificial intelligence who provides the group with her hacking prowess and access to near limitless information. And of course, there's Princess Sally Acorn, the leader of the Freedom Fighters and a character who was meant to spark something in young boys and definitely sparked something in Sonic the Hedgehog. Or as Sally sometimes refers to him, Sonic Hedgehog. Like Hedgehog is his last name or something. Wait, it is?
Даже так? Ну ладно.
So yeah, the Archie Sonic comic allowed kids to spend more time with their favorite
Это
Saturday
напомнило
morning
мне одну
rep.
шутку из Бума. Где, помнишь эпизод, в котором Соник пытался научиться плавать, и он такой, типа, что-то как там, то ли опасность, что-то такое, мое второе имя, и Накас такой, я думал, твое второе имя, ну, типа,
З, да.
Да.
In their seemingly endless battle with the terrifying and tyrannical Dr. Robotnik. Oh, and Snively, of course. And Scratch. And Grounder. Coconuts. Oh, and of course, the comic's #1 fan, Crabmeat, who buys all the collector's editions. And we can't forget about the Universalamander, who was so powerful that he could go toe-to-toe with Supersonic. And then there was that time that Sonic battled the Spawn Mower and King Gong.
Они серьезно засунули сюда спауна? Тот Макфарвен, наверное, блин, гордится этим очень сильно.
And Steve Urkel. That's right. They decided to go with adapting both cartoons, combining Sat AM's depressing premise with a comedic tone akin to the adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. So Dr. Robotnik may still be trying to kill Sonic and his friends, but the ways he goes about that are now as ridiculous as they are brutal. We have a forest-destroying robot plant that's defeated with bad weather, Bunny being manhandled by a couple of Yankees and getting half roboticized in a bot on the spot. Robotnik and this guy having an increasingly ridiculous disguise-based face-off in order to retrieve the bomb, which turns out to be a bug bomb. Bad versions of our heroes from an alternate dimension terrorizing the townsfolk. Run, Turtle, run!
Как его... Забыла, как называется. Господи боже мой, это ж Прайм, по сути. Nine Inch Tails. Ой.
A routine landline check leading to finding an underground society of nerdy creatures aptly named NERBs. Robotnik crashing Sonic and Sally's wedding, which turns out to be a sting operation. Sonic meeting a frog who gives him magic stones that grants him
Кто это такой?
Magic Frog.
powers like super strength, allowing him to save his friends with a giant fly swatter, and you get the picture. The comic nails this weird combination of serious and silly, almost like I'm reading a post-apocalyptic Sonic slice of life comedy. And I quickly found myself having more fun with it than I'd expected, because...
Так это ж Sonic Boom, по сути, уже.
Не, ну постапокалипсиса там не было.
Ну, были вайбы.
Чисто потому, что народу там мало.
А с чего ты взял, что не было постапокалипсиса? Там не сказали, в Sonic Boom нет сюжета.
Almost like I'm reading a post-apocalyptic Sonic slice of life comedy. and I quickly found myself having more fun with it than I'd expected. Because even if every idea doesn't land, it's hard to get bored when there's always something new right around the corner. Plus, most of these early issues have 3 or more separate stories, which keeps things snappy, along with a bunch of single-page gags and a variety of jokes. For one, there are plenty of slapstick shenanigans if you're into that type of thing. Then there are surprisingly funny editor's notes that pop up from time to time. Loads of ridiculous references ranging from the Termite Nader to Botman to the Ghost of Christmas Fast to
Серьезно?
Al Capone and the Master of Finjitsu. And I do really appreciate
Господи боже, они тут все понамешали. Даже черепах засунули.
with these that the comic never wholesale references other franchises without having some kind of spin on it. Hey, Sonic, did you just lie to me, you filthy blue rat? Then there are the puns. Most of these are downright painful in the best way possible. I mean, of course, Bunny wants to be a hairdresser. Of course, these interdimensional weirdos are named Vertical and Horizontal. Of course, there's an alien named Karhim of Wheat.
Стать парикмахером. В чем здесь шутка?
Bunny's hair care.
Hair. Ну, вообще, зайцы и кролики разные вещи.
Of course, these interdimensional weirdos are named Vertical and Horizontal. Of course, there's an alien named Karhim of Wheat. Of course, there's the parasites and antibodies inside the sick guy. Of course, the baby deer turned out to be a bombardier. And of course, Sonic stops the story to list off tree puns. Heck,
Ой, бляха-муха. Ёбаные
I'm gonna
каламбуры.
go out on a limb here and say that you could leaf through countless comic books and never find a better treatment of tree puns. Oh yeah, and the Cold War is over. Wait a minute. Sometimes the humor simply comes from appreciating the comic's commitment to a bit. Take The Man from Hedgehog from the main series' 16th issue. Robotnik spends this whole story desperately trying to figure out who is in charge of the Acorn Kingdom's secret intelligence. He interrogates a mole, his minions find a mysterious note, and his plans are thwarted again and again until finally, Sonic is saved from certain doom by who else than who? Yeah, this whole thing is a joke about Robotnik asking who it is that's stopping his plans, only to get confused because who is the one who's stopping him.
Моррисон бы... Ну ладно, Моррисон бы оценил, действительно.
I also think it's just an elaborate way to get to this final joke about how long it takes to get to the center of a Tootsie Pop, which... Who? I need you to tell me. I need to know.
Ёбаный тут... And one, and a two, and a three. Three, блядь, такая странная американская реклама, которую критик обозревал ностальгирующий. Такая странная хрень.
Wait. What about you? Yeah, you tell me. By the way, this comic really loves breaking the fourth wall, and sometimes it gives us great examples of this comic's commitment to stupid bits.
I crisscrossed the Great Forest at super speed until I spotted Antoine and easily duped him into revealing the entrance. Give me a break, it was dark, he was drawn in silhouette!
Now Antoine blames our artist? What's next? The comic takes a jab at how Sally's fur was miscolored in the original miniseries. Sonic frequently addresses the reader, he'll complain that he isn't the central focus of a story, or tell kids to pull out their Sega Genesis and help him on his journey to the next page. In this way, the comic often embraces its status not only as a product for children, but as a spin-off to the far more popular games, frequently adding new game
Ну,
characters
кстати
into the
говоря,
mix.
довольно забавно наблюдать
Да
это.
уж, классические хаутиксы мне всегда казались очень странными.
Ну, понимаешь, в чем проблема? Это именно и в рисовке комиксов, потому что в оригинале с их игр они нормально
В
смотрелись.
оригинале они на артах тоже странно выглядят.
Не, ну, самое смешное, в играх они нормально смотрятся.
Интересно, почему они засунули Майди, но при этом забыли про Рэй? Он милый.
Хрен его
Он
знает.
по цветовой гамме туда, что ли, не вписывался?
Не знаю, правда, почему, но очень как-то странно смотреть на хаотиксов.
And creating one-shots to promote any new Sonic adventures. Though I could definitely see myself finding this sort of thing cynical or cloying, I don't know. It wears its identity as a side product to a video game on its sleeve without any reservation, and with a very endearing tongue-in-cheek attitude about it. It's simply so direct with the reader. And to top it all off, each of these tie-in stories and characters are almost always directly integrated into the premise of the comic or its original cast. So it's combining everything a Sonic fan at the time could have
И Соник и Наклз был, даже по 3 по утра был, серьезно был комикс, охренеть.
loved about the Blue Blur and giving them what they
Знаешь
want.
что?
To spend more...
Ждем игру, в которой появятся Барк и Бин.
Людям не интересен медведь Барк.
И птица Бин.
Людям
Люди не
пофиг.
хотят видеть Полярного медведя Барка и птицу Мину, да.
time with Sonic and his friends and foes. In this way, the comic really just feels like it's excited to be a Sonic comic, and to celebrate that with the kids reading it. But what really sells this are the loads
Ну,
Не СТМ, а комиксов Арчи. А комикс Арчи все намешали.
of fan interaction. As early as the first issue in the main series, the writers are answering kids' questions about Sonic the Hedgehog or giving out chili dog recipes. But these aren't simply relegated to the back corner of the comic.
Криво и смешно звучит.
Ну, как говорится, это автоматические субтитры, просто сам весь видос только на английском.
No. The writers often answer fan questions as Sonic himself. This results in certain interactions that are nothing short of magical.
Чел
The
явно
best of
знал,
which
что
has
он
got
делал с этим фреймом.
to be Tammy. Yeah, that's right. I'm a big Tammy fan. You aren't? Well, don't worry. You will be.
Dear Sonicgram Associates, in issue number 11, you said that Dr. Robotnik is obsessed with robots. Well, I'm obsessed with him.
Я помню, я тебе это показывала. Я
всё,
показывала
точно.
это тебе. Подожди, знаешь что?
Что?
Это ведь из 90-х, я так понимаю,
Да.
Это как это либо старшая сестра, либо мама Джулиана.
I have a bad case of puppy love for the evil but lovable megalomaniac. What is his first name and how old is he? He's so handsome and his smile makes my heart skip a beat. But I have one problem. What has happened to his personality on the Saturday morning show? I liked him better in the good old days, back when he was just starting out on his quest for world domination. Perhaps he just needs a date. I'm available. Please pass this information and the enclosed photo on to him. Do you think he'll be interested? Oh, one more thing. Is there any Robotnikgram service where I can write directly to my love?
Hey, listen, Tammy. Did that snake Dr. Ivo Robotnik roboticize your brain? He's a dirty, low-down, no-good, backbiting, evil blimp. How could you love him? Sorry, but it's my sworn duty to protect the innocent from old Baldy. No way I'm gonna fix you up with that.
Сумочкин жаловался, что в Colors Соник называет Эгмана Болди Макносер. О, пожалуйста, это первые зачатки.
Ну так все правильно. Кто писал сценарий? Americans who love Sonic from 90s.
Двое США одинаковых с ума.
Да.
Tyrant. I'm spoken for, but I think the editor guys, Scott and Paul and Victor, at Archie Comics are single. So why don't you give them a call and stay away from that robo dummy?
Well, they can't quite compare to Tammy. My other favorite bits of fan mail come when the writers create scenarios based off fan theories, like this one with various fan-made origin stories for Tails. Sometimes these furry fellas even ask kids to write in if they want to see more of certain characters. Again, it's just that extra little bit of focus on the fans that makes this feel like a real celebration. But the physical nature of the comic is part of that too. Like there are these little mazes to guide Sonic through that you'd have to draw on, cool pinups to cut out of your comic with birthday cards and bumper stickers. You even get to cut out these robot pieces, choose Sonic's dialogue, and you can crush Robotnik with your finger. Yeah, take that, and that, and that. And dear Aurora, Tammy, I didn't see you there.
Она везде.
Мне интересно, чем сейчас занимается эта девушка?
Наверное, любят нынешние части. Может быть, в фандоме же все еще участвует. Кто знает.
Anyway, let's move on to writing my very own Sonic the Hedgehog story. That's right, folks. There's even a whole story where the word bubbles are left blank and you get to fill them in. The very best of these are going to be published in a later issue too. So, you know what that means.
По сути, это то, чем мы с тобой занимаемся.
Тип того.
So then I told her, you have to decide for yourself. Walk on your own. Move forward. You've got a good pair of legs, Sal. And she was like, Sonic, shut up.
Well, Sonic, the thing is that when you give people advice like that, it comes across really weird because you, like, move really fast and some of us have...
Did you hear that, Crabme? It's my lucky day. Sonic the Hedgehog is about to be single.
Are they trying to catch crabs? Are they trying to catch my people?
Good, Sonic. Good. Now, come
А
to
это, видимо,
Daddy.
комикс Джон Брейн писал.
Реально, походу, Джумр.
That came out wrong.
Oh, wow, Sonic. It's a fish. I caught one. I caught a big one. Are you proud of me, finally?
Oh yeah, Tails, that's equivalent exchange for you. Eat that sucker.
Equivalent exchange? Wait, what are you talking about, Sonic?
Tails,
О том, что он походу рококаку выловил, блядь.
I don't have a big enough word bubble. Holy guacamole! Is that equivalent exchange?
Не, это Клэш.
Что-то большевато для Клэша.
Нормально.
Yes, it is I, Equivalent Exchange, and we are about to exchange numbers, hedge hunk. My big boy is about to gobble you little boys up. That came out wrong. Oh.
Tails, I think that came out wrong. We should leave before this gets awkward.
I don't know, Sonic. I kind of do better in awkward situations. I think I'm already awkward, so...
Tails, your awkward mumbling is screwing me up. Shut the... Well, looks like you're all washed up. Robotnik.
Look out when he storms through. Sonic the Hedgehog. Don't doubt what he can do. Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic, he can really move. Sonic, he's got an attitude. Sonic, he's the fastest thing alive. He's the fastest thing alive. He's the fastest thing alive.
Ах, красота!
Oh boy, that was awesome. There's no way they aren't gonna include ours after. Wait, was that a
Кто там?
blur I just saw?
Hello?
Fan mail, Sonic. Is that you?
Hey, dude, Lowart, was it? Yeah, bud, I just wanted to let you know you're way past late. Like, by over a decade. 3 kids already won.
Oh, no, that can't be right.
Может.
Did you at least read it, Fan mail, Sonic?
Whoa, look at that time. Got a juice and loose.
He's so cool. But you know what? I should be happy for Calder, Bremen, and Kenny, because that's what made reading this feel special. The comic seemed so excited to have you as a fan that I couldn't help but become one. I mean, I wasn't that big of a Sonic guy going into this, but by the time I had made it through so many of these early issues, well, it starts...
А, так вот откуда этот арт. Тот самый Соник с пучеглазенький, чебишный.
to feel like being a Sonic fan must be pretty cool, or at least a lot of fun. Throughout all this, you can feel how much this team cared about making this a good product, how much they wanted to make kids laugh, how much they wanted to make themselves laugh. And they wanted this comic to be as fun as it could possibly be. And I think the best early example of that commitment to fun can be found here. This is Night of a Thousand Sonics, and it's as delightfully dumb as it looks. Here, many Sonics scattered across many dimensions must join forces against the nefarious Robo-Robotnik. Pretty much all the Sonics are references of some sort.
О, блядь. О, ладно, такие вот истории про, знаете, альтернативных персонажей, причем еще настолько, блядь, абсурдно. Это порой великолепно. Это настолько хорошо в своей... Блядь. Ладно, Соник Росомаха хорошо смотрится.
Ну, Росомахи вроде бы тоже относятся к грызунам, если мне не
Ну, вообще, да.
Так что, в принципе, ничего криминального.
По факту.
Я думала, Росомахи больше относятся к медведям или барсукам.
Or another, which alone wouldn't mean much to me. But when there are so many of them, when a whole issue is built around embracing this concept, it adds a lot. The issue is just so much... I keep saying this word, but really, it's just so much fun. Our Robotnik joins forces to try to defeat this poser. The Sonics lose their color as they enter this weird interdimensional neutral zone while battling baddies who are still colored in. You can cut out and make your very own SWAT bot, and you better be using safety scissors for that, or I will call your parents. And eventually, every Sonic does a supersonic spin to fight giant bull.
Они же не режут ни хрена. Что за бред?
Да, они порой плохо режут, но...
Я с одной стороны понимаю, а с другой стороны не понимаю их концепцию.
And save the day. The comic is pretty dang good at this, taking a simple idea or gag that wouldn't usually do much for me on its own, and pushing it so far that I can't help but smile at the silly spectacle of it all. Speaking of which, throughout these early sections, the artists deserve a lot of credit for giving the comic this charm and comedy. The expressive faces, the dynamic, fast-paced action, the way they punctuate the humor. All in all, they really...
выглядит так ужасно. Нет, я знаю, как он выглядит. Он выглядит так, как будто его нарисовали в средневековье. И люди, которые никогда в жизни не видели ежей.
А, ну по факту. Реально средневековый Соник. О, кто-нибудь сыграйте на следяков инструментах. Хотя нет, такой, по-моему, медивал версия Соника.
Сколько там видео длится?
Ну да. Я не буду все смотреть.
Мы тут полдня просидим.
Так я не буду все смотреть.
Я думала, видео уже заканчивается.
Ты что, издеваешься? Чел распиздел тут на 2,50.
Пиздос. Я за такое время посмотрела спидран по Generations. Вы чё?
Не, я же говорю, я не буду все это смотреть. Если хочешь, можешь идти отдыхать.
А мы посмотрим?
Я хочу половину посмотреть.
Ладно.
Elevate the comic's material. At this early stage, there are two main artists to consider, Dave Manick and Art Mawhinney. Manick often stretches the designs and expressions of these critters to their cartoony extremes, while Mawhinney is usually more on model while still very expressive. Their styles mesh together really well, and it was often somewhat difficult for me to discern who was...
более похож на японский оригинал.
Ну да, потому что я не очень нравится Соник, у которого такой будто ирокез.
Да, меня это тоже отвращает. Это выглядит вообще не по...
Такое чувство, будто у него либо...
Это не выглядит как колючки у ежей.
А, я понял, что это похоже. Как в мультиках, вот персонажи, чтобы напугать кого-то в речке либо в море, надевали акулий плавник на башку. Вот такое чувство, реально, будто акулий плавник.
Drawing what? This way, the comic manages to have a cohesive aesthetic, with these round, bubbly character designs that feel soft and inviting. Yet, simultaneously, the world's aesthetic...
А, ну, к сожалению, почему-то многие... Ну, после того самого сериала, вот этого Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, многие стали почему-то именно в этом цвете его рисовать. Я не знаю, почему.
And character designs usually manage to fit in with SatAM's, which isn't surprising considering that Mawhinney worked as a storyboard artist on SatAM itself. Again, I can imagine a kid reading this comic and being so excited to see entire stories with the exact same aesthetic as the show they love, making the connection between one and the other feel even more seamless. Like these really are lost episodes from the show. But I should also give some credit to Scott Shaw, another artist, who brought a ton of personalities to the original miniseries and set a great standard for the rest of this early comic, with lots of fun squash and stretch and these really expressive characters and poses. Then there's the writing. Now, I've already talked about the humor and the fun that injects into the comic, but what I haven't talked about much are the heroes of this story. Or should I say, hero.
Есть же еще один сериал про Соника. Underground.
По-моему, он тоже будет в Archie.
Посмотрим.
After all, this comic is called Sonic the Hedgehog, right? Sonic is his usual wisecracking, fun-loving, badnik-breaking self, a somewhat typical, impatient hero who, for better or worse, rushes headlong into danger and cares about his friends. And the writers really know how to get a ton of entertainment value out of these traits, along with an unexpected level of in-depth characterization. A good example of this would be issue 12's The Lynx is a Jinx. Here, Sonic is on one of his usual rescue runs through the forest to protect critters from Robotnik. However, this time he encounters an...
А, Соник Шортса?
Да.
А, ну да, та самая анимация, где это Соник разрубил Салли.
И Банни.
Да-да-да, он разрубил их, это было жестко.
Interesting fellow, Larry Lynx. And Larry has a problem, or perhaps it's more accurate to say that he is the problem. For whatever reason, bad luck follows him wherever he goes. So when the freedom fighters get injured because of his luck, well, Sally and the rest of the gang are quick to tell him he needs to find somewhere else to live. But Sonic doesn't follow along with that. Nah, even though he just met the guy, he says, Sonic the Hedgehog never abandons his friends. What a cool dude. But this isn't inherently interesting to me for a hero. I'd hope at the bare minimum, Sonic would act this way. But here's where the fun begins. As Sonic looks for a place where Larry can stay, they run into the freedom fighters who have been captured by some SWAT bots. Sonic has an idea though. He tells Larry to go out right in front of the SWAT bots. Larry, the poor little guy, assumes this is Sonic abandoning him. After all, he just told Sonic that it was probably his bad luck that got his friends captured in the first place. But no, Sonic the Hedgehog never abandons a friend. Instead, he puts them in danger, banking on Larry's bad luck ability working as well on enemies as it does on allies. Which, of course,
А в итоге, блять, оказывается, что все-таки неудача просто оказалась случайностью, и Ваню убивают нахуй. Конец. Мама! Рысь убили, баба!
does. To top it off, Sonic's original goal was to try and get Larry some good luck to break his bad luck, and it seems like this mission's success has done just that. a roundabout and absolutely ridiculous way for Sonic to save the day and help Larry out. This is an example of what makes Sonic go from likable but basic to something a little more fun. He's got a cheeky edge to him, this willingness to just charge into danger to help others and save his friends. And he does that because he's so sure he can pull it off. Of course, this cockiness comes from the fact that he's incredibly clever and resourceful, like when Sonic saves Bunny from this giant magnet by tricking Robotnik into expanding its area of effect and having him point it back at Robotropolis. Again, the sort of plan that doesn't come without its risks, but he's confident that he can manipulate the enemy, and he just goes for it. If anyone can think on their feet, it's Sonic. And finally, we've got issue 14's Tails' Taste of Power, and it serves as a really endearing showcase of Sonic's personality. This time, Tails eats a fruit from the Mobian Tree of Wisdom and becomes hyper-intelligent. With this newfound intellect, he's able to take down badniks by turning their own weapons against them. He builds a machine to help with housework, and his verbiage metamorphoses into a veritable inundation of palatial proportions.
Напиздел знатно, товарищ. Аж, блядь, не помещается ни хера.
But with this intelligence comes confidence, and Tails takes off to subdue the Freedom Fighter's prime nemesis on his own. When he arrives, though, the fruit's power wears off, and he's walked right into Robotnik's hands. However, after deciphering Tails' words, Sonic soon arrives. So how is he going to fight his way out of this one? Well, he won't. He can't. Tails is in Robotnik's clutches, but Sonic has another trick up his sleeve. See, earlier on, Smart Tails awarded himself with a medal, but Sonic takes that medal and tells Robotnik that it's actually an explosive, and that Tails simply got captured while trying to complete his mission to destroy Robotropolis. But now, if Robotnik doesn't let both him and Tails go, Sonic is gonna blow them all sky high. Even though Robotnik starts off convinced this is a lie, when it comes down to the wire, he panics and gives in. Through this, Sonic transforms this symbol of arrogance into a symbol of action. Despite Tails' mistake, though, Sonic...
А прикол, а может быть оно реально было сделано из крышки, там, знаешь, какой-нибудь старой. Шут его знает.
Какого размера, если даже она где-то вот такая?
Может быть, ее выковали таким. Может, ее выковали таким образом, может, просто художник пить хотел очень сильно. Вот и нарисовал.
Он просто, наверное, знаешь, рисовал это в пятницу вечером, такой, блядь.
Пиво сейчас.
Сейчас бы пивка.
Для рывка.
Да.
Never lectures him. He understands that, most likely, he has already learned his lesson. At the end of the story, Tails, now his regular self, asks Sonic how he knew the plan would work. To which Sonic replies, Robotnik's a coward, Tails. That's the kind of thing a leader has to know. Again, we're seeing Sonic's willingness to just charge in there and get things done even if he doesn't have a plan, and how his confidence, charisma, and creativity still leads to victory. Moments like this make Sonic such a likable hero. Watching his cockiness get under the skin of jerks like Robotnik always feels really satisfying, and his overall confidence is magnetic. First off, that's because the stuff he pulls off is actually pretty impressive, not to mention fun to watch, but more importantly, because it's almost always expressed alongside how understanding, brave, or kind he is. And it's just good for gags. Sonic's a hero who will, without hesitation, rescue his #1 pen pal no matter the danger, all while still having that little bit of edge and ego that makes him so much...
Это ранний Наклз американский. У него очень уёбская морда. У него такое чувство, будто его комары покусали, а потом еще и пчелы. Я не знаю, почему у него такой очень опухший нос и опухшие щеки.
Да у Соника тоже с лицом не поля.
Не, у него, понимаешь,
Не, на том же.
Есть? А, ну здесь, да, всрато. Но у Наклза прикол то, что у него еще в этом, как его, в андеграунде такое лицо было.
Так странно видеть относительно нормального Наклза и Соника, видеть Тейлза, который вообще, ну, не своего цвета, не своего дизайна.
Ну, его хотели сделать таким просто милым, пушистым лисеночком, ребеночком. Но зачем его коричневым сделать, я не знаю, реально. Ему...
Который хочет смешной поцелуй.
Да. Я до сих пор...
А ты хочешь смешной поцелуй?
Нет, спасибо.
Обычный, просто поцелуй.
Нет, спасибо. Потом. Что ж тебе это, а? Потом.
Ладно.
More entertaining. It all comes together to bring this scrappy freedom fighter to life, juicing it all while kicking some good old Robotnik. In the end, I gotta agree with the little guy. He's definitely way past cool.
Can't waste time being unconscious. Sally needs me. I'll pass out on my own time.
However, there is one character whose coolness may rival the Blue Blood, and who often brings out his ego more than any other at this point in the comic. That's right, it's the new porcupine on the block with the buff chest, Knuckles the Echidna. Sonic's interactions with Knuckles they're pretty great. As expected, Knuckles is introduced when Sonic and Tails arrive at Angel Island. He's been tricked into working with Dr. Robotnik, who told him that these two want to steal the island's Chaos Emerald power source. So he rolls out that unwelcome mat and eventually captures them. What these early interactions show us is that Knuckles is a real numbskull. He gets upset with Sonic and Tails for knowing secrets he told them, he resorts to basic bad-mouthing, and he's quick to make assumptions about who he should and shouldn't trust. However, he's ultimately a good guy who's firm but fair. So, despite believing that Sonic and Tails represent a major threat to this island, he gives them a second chance. If they'll get out of his place, he won't give them any more trouble. Of course, this
Готэм Сити, серьезно, блять.
causes a rift in his and Robotnik's relationship. Obviously, Robotnik didn't want him to just let them go. And Knuckles' response to this, it really illustrates what makes this early version of his character so fun. Keep your shirt on, Doc. You take care of business, while I give these guys the business. His dialogue...
Это было слишком плохо, ну ладно, блять, какие... я понял.
Вектор выглядит очень...
Я понял, откуда этот вектор. Это вектор с того самого рисунка, где он еще был вместе с Соником в группе. Там еще был какой-то петух и пара животных.
Ну да, ты не знал, что...
Не, я знал про это. Ну,
Да.
типа, имеется в виду, что здесь он именно все-таки похож на ту версию, на того вектора. Здесь он... Вот, глядите, вот очень странно. Где-то он рисуется действительно...
Да не, честно, я бы сказал, что здесь вектор выглядит относительно нормально. Вот Наклз выглядит так, как будто его нарисовал, блядь, как там говорил Сумочкин, 3-летним ребенком пальцем из задницы.
Не, просто проблема в чем? То, что в некоторых рисунках он выглядит очень, так сказать, странно, с какими-то ободками на руках, еще что-то. Хотя вот, например, в...
Мне не понравился, наоборот, он в буме. Они убрали у него наушники, из-этого его голова выглядит слишком...
Да бумовский вектор, он выглядит очень херово, он еще блеклый, пиздец. Не, имею в виду, что...
Кстати, да, они как будто... Они цвета как будто на него
Не-не-не, я
похожи.
про это говорю, версию, то, что вот почему-то они, я не знаю, они везде очень разно рисуют, хотя у него уже был свой дизайн уже готовый, из хаотиксов. Я не понимаю, нахуя его так часто меняют.
Хаотиксов, а не хаотикс.
is rarely laugh out loud funny, but it's
Хотя нет, подожди,
consistently
в песне
goofy
же говорят хаотикс. А почему я тогда говорю хаотикс?
Привычка, наверное.
Ай, в пизду.
enough that I can't help but smile. Soon after, Knuckles realizes that the Chaos Emerald is missing. But this doesn't make
Вот это я
sense. He's
понимаю,
been
блядь. Эволюция.
Ой, блядь. Простите,
Да
просто
нахуй
очень люблю.
посмотри.
Я просто очень люблю эти сратые рисунки. Ну, Наклз
Мне очень
теперь.
нравится, что, по сути, вот это первое святилище Наклза. Блядь, просто кучка камней, как австралоблиц.
Я одно не понимаю, почему Наклз стал лилипутом?
Точно, это тоже такое чувство, как будто его...
Он скукурузил, знаешь, это... Я вспомнил, что с ним случилось из Рокдейза, его распидорасило.
Да.
Ну просто, блядь, куда делись его колени? Чё за...
monitoring Sonic and Tails, so the pieces immediately click into place. Knuckles realizes he's been duped and joins forces with Sonic and Tails to stop Robotnik. It's part of what makes him so lovable. After all, he might be naive and a bit stupid sometimes, but he's not an idiot. On occasion, he just lacks the basic experience necessary to make wise judgment calls. From here, Sonic and Tails aren't sure how they'll get home, but lo and behold, our buddy Knuckles gathered the pieces of their plane for them. So he's also a guy who will try to correct his mistakes and help others. All around, he's a lovable goofball with a
Правда,
strong
очень
sense
странно,
of...
что самолет в итоге собрал Соник, а не Тейлз, хотя Тейлз даже гениальный механик.
Ну, может, здесь пригодилась на просто скорость Соника.
Черт его знает.
morality, even if he makes some iffy decisions from time to time. And these same elements of his personality are obvious in his
Но
subsequent
опять же, это все еще хотя бы просто, да, он наивный, но понятный персонаж, потому что вспоминаем Бум, где он просто...
Комик-релив.
Я
ем
салфетка. Внезапная шутка про феминизм. Чё, блин, вот я вот это вообще...
Да ну, так это наоборот забавно.
Не, ну это прикольно, конечно, что типа это... Да, я все еще дурак, но разве у меня нет понятия о феминизме? Ну просто это так странно, блин. Ну хотя, знаете, вот кто бы что ни говорил, но в этом какая-то прелесть Наклза вот из Бума, что он дурак, но он может порой такое выдать, блядь, что вот сидишь и думаешь, ёб твою мать, а почему этот персонаж, почему многие его гнобят? Ну и, конечно, спасибо ему за величайший мем. Мем! Approved!
appearances as well. For example, in the Sonic and Knuckles one-shot, Robotnik takes over Angel Island and makes it into a flying weapon. Needless to say, this poses a major problem for the Freedom Fighters, so Sonic and Tails return to the island to figure out what's going on. Knuckles, ever the professional at jumping to conclusions, thinks that they're part of the reason his home is a war zone right now. However, after a scuffle and a save from Tails, they manage to show him that the stars in the sky are all wrong. The island has moved without him noticing. Again, while Knuckles may be the type of guy who doesn't notice what's right in front of his face, he's also one who accepts these facts for what they are and is immediately willing to correct course.
Вот честно, вот такой стиль бы хотелось увидеть чаще, потому что как-то все более выровненно смотрится.
А я не могу, мне не нравится, как Тейлз рисует.
Не, ну опять
Он
же,
вообще на себя не...
Тейлз, ну опять же, это издержки мультсериала, потому что, к сожалению, все рисовали по, так сказать, американской...
Ну, понятно.
Да, по американской технологичке из мультсериала. Но Наклз и Соник выглядят хорошо. Без ебучего ирокеза, ровненько, приятно. Ну и морда у Наклза приятная.
In fact, from here, Knuckles shows off his clever side. See, when he realizes that Robotnik has been siphoning energy from the Chaos Emerald, he quickly grabs it and breaks it. Robotnik, believing that the island will now crash in a knothole below, runs away, thinking he's victorious. However, Knuckles didn't really smash the emerald. Nah, he busted a fake he kept on him for this sort of occasion, so now he returns the real, undamaged emerald to its rightful place, and the island can soar back into the sky once more. So, when it comes to his job, Knuckles
В какой-то степени.
isn't just some dummy. He's capable of resourcefulness and intelligence. We even see him collecting more spare emeralds and helping this island's critters. So,
Знаете, как будто из мании вышел.
Ну, есть такое.
regardless of his flaws, he has this admirable sense of duty, and he puts in the work. At this point, Sonic even respects Knuckles enough to ask him to join the Freedom Fighters, but Knuckles rejects the offer. He has his own responsibilities. In following issues, Sonic...
Ну да, ты чё? Само собой нужно отдать уважение такому.
Ой, аллилуйя, не говняный коричневый Тейлз.
Слава богу, потихонечку уходим от этого.
And Knuckles' rivalry becomes really funny. These two will lock eyes from across the room and just start going at each other for no real reason. And if there's trouble, must be the other guy's fault. But somehow, this isn't obnoxious. No, their dialogue is consistently silly and snappy enough to totally undercut that potential element to this. And it's just funny watching their source of conflict go from Knuckles being paranoid of Sonic to Sonic being paranoid of Knuckles. By this point, they have what feels like a bickering brothers dynamic, constantly trying to one-up each other and ready at any moment to butt heads, all while still having an underlying respect for the other person. Which leads us to the Super Sonic versus Hyper Knuckles special. A story that feels like the epitome of an issue where...
Не, ну, кстати, идея сама по себе интересная, посмотреть битву как бы супер-версии Наклза и Соника.
Its end, the characters have completely lost the plot. But while I genuinely don't know why these two are fighting like crazy, I can still somehow feel how much they know that they must. And that chaotic, colorful, and uncalled for dimensional carnage is what I'm here for. You want to talk about bickering brothers? This two-page spread depicts the clash of Super Sonic and Hyper Knuckles as they pull hair and wind up for a knuckle sandwich. These dumb, stupid children, I love them. I can use my whirling fists like wheels and my feet like feet. Overall, this special and Sonic and Knuckles' relationship in general is an absolute blast, displaying Sonic's ego at its funniest and Knuckles' earnest annoyance at its peak. Just a wonderful time all around, and a dynamic that only helps...
В какой-то степени. Опять же, не в полной мере, Шадифу все-таки другая персоналия, но как-никак здесь он скорее преданный, но легко доверчивый.
Шадиф просто уничтожитель сраки.
Да, он просто любит печенье Марии. У него после этого посттравматический синдром, какую-то девочку там что-то. На самом деле он просто любит это печенье, вот и все.
Просто он один раз купил пачку, она с плесенью оказалась.
Блять.
Just a wonderful time all around, and a dynamic that only helps to make both these characters a great deal more fun than they'd otherwise be. Still, Sonic has plenty of other friends to talk about. Now,
Ой, бля, точно же, там же в начале выпуска говорилось про то, что у Салли вот разные дизайны, вот были у него очень часто менялись волосы. Ну, честно, я бы даже не подумал, что это Салли. Вообще. Она вообще...
Я подумала, у нее просто цвет волос другой, а так она такая же.
Most of them start off pretty simple as these gags or comedic commentators, but as things continue, there's some good development to be had with these guys, and the writers show that they aren't willing to let them stagnate. In many cases, this comes from simply acknowledging that once you strip back the goofiness and puns and the fourth wall breaking gags, this world is awful. Robotnik has taken almost everything from these critters, their family, friends, and homes. At the end of the day, this is a story about a small group of rebels fighting a near hopeless fight. And the comic starts to focus more on how these...
По сути, вот смотри, СТМ — это оригинальная история Modern Ассасинов, а Adventure Sonic the Hedgehog — это наши с тобой истории.
Чё?
Я знаю, что люди не поймут, но по сути это так и есть.
Я знаю, что никто не поймет, но не поймет. Ой, конечно, железная, блядь.
Ты поймешь. Если, наверное, будешь вот эти комиксы подходить.
Кто там? Спать хочется страшно.
Давай дальше.
Подожди ты. О, болит.
Of rebels fighting a near hopeless fight. And the comic starts to focus more on how these scrappy kids are going to overcome these impossible odds. Now, that's not to say that the comic is overly serious about that at the moment, but most issues are now becoming a mix of a serious story and an incredibly silly one. Recurring adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog characters like Scratch, Grounder, and Coconuts eventually disappear entirely. And more, the comic attempts to tell more grounded narratives that last an entire issue. Beyond leaning into that underlying darkness of the setting, what these stories often allow for are welcome moments of clarity. Moments that humanize these silly little guys and show that they are affected by what's going on around them. Like Sonic's attempts to de-roboticize his Uncle Chuck and Mutski, along with the sadness he feels from their separation. Or this guy trying to rescue his family from Robotnik's mind control and having to leave them behind. Actually, one particularly good example of this kind of thing comes in issue 18, where Sally's teacher and...
Что-то я не знаю, автор не особо любит Ротора, прям. Реально очень странно. Как-то он постоянно никогда не упоминает его имя, всегда как-то пренебрежительно относится в его отношении. Очень странно. Чё им так я насалил Ротор?
mentor Jalila passes away. This character has shown up pretty much out of nowhere, but it still works for me because it feels like we're getting a peek behind the curtain of the seemingly silly lives of these characters. A sudden, oh wait, moment, as Sally sits alone mourning her loss and Sonic arrives. He sits with her, comforts her, saying, "Tonight is almost yesterday, Sally, and there are many more tomorrows ahead." It's a genuinely sweet moment that manages to not only show us a different side of these characters, but also make me go, wow, I might actually enjoy these two as a pair. In fact, Sonic and Sally have quite a few cute moments together sprinkled throughout, though they usually have a bit more of a comedically flirty tilt to them. Honestly, to me, the comic hasn't only carried over the good parts of Sonic and Sally's relationship from Sad AM, it's improved upon them. But speaking of that show, Antoine, oh boy. In the show, Antoine is just... he's the worst. And this isn't some hot take. A lot of people hated him, and those fans carried that hatred over to the comic.
We had a character, Antoine, from the Saturday AM series. And I cannot begin to tell you how much mail we got from readers saying they absolutely hated the character, they wanted us to kill him off, that sort of thing.
The reason why...
Прям-таки убить. Ну, хотя я могу понять, потому что Антуан, он правда мерзкий во многих моментах. Просто трус, который... О, Салли, я намного умнее, чем этот тупой ежик Соник. Ну, потом я убегу, потому что я трусливая тварь. Но я тоже...
Короче, местный Арно.
Ну, не Арно, конечно, блядь,
да,
но...
ты прав, для Арно у него недостаточно тупая рожа.
Не, ну, Антуан-то прям очень неприятная личность. Его порой реально хотелось придушить, потому что... Я не понимаю, блядь, как можно было создать порой вот настолько прям не отталкивающего персонажа.
Why Antoine sucked is simple. He was an annoying coward with no redeeming traits, at least none that I can remember. He's consistently the butt of every joke, but it's still not satisfying to see him suffer. His scream, it should be used as a fire alarm in apartment complexes worldwide to ensure a swift and safe evacuation. He's the primary focus of some of the show's worst comedy episodes, and I could go on and on, but his existence only makes the show worse. So what did the comic do? Well, the writers seemed to realize that leaving him the way he was wouldn't work. They had to do something else, and they did. Now, at first, he's a lot like his show counterpart. Arrogant, but ultimately useless. However, at this stage, he never gets much focus. He's more off to the side, unexceptional, but unobtrusive. The lack of audible screaming also helps. Regardless though, when he is the butt of the joke, it's quick, snappy, and usually done in a manner that just plays up the way that he's out of his depth. Plus, the way the comic leans into his ego, it's actually really funny sometimes. But then, the 10th issue comes around. Here, Antoine takes his freedom-fighting friends on a ride in his hot air balloon. However, since he's somewhat ill-equipped for this adventure, some buzz bombers pop the balloon and it comes crashing down. Of course, the rest of the gang is frustrated with Antoine since he was so confident in its usefulness in fighting Robotnik's forces. But Antoine's response to this is where things get interesting. Now, it might seem small at first, but he doesn't just brush this aside. He's genuinely upset and ashamed that he failed his teammates. He wants to prove to everyone that he isn't useless, and he is unwilling to give up on something he believes in. So yes, Antoine is sometimes stupid and overconfident, and he can have an inflated ego, but at the end of the day, he's willing to go out there, fight for his friends, and put himself on the line. And by learning from his mistakes, he ends up saving the freedom fighters single-handedly. He actually has a place and a purpose on this team. Then there's issue 23 with the Volunteer. Here we begin by showing that yes, Antoine is still a scaredy cat who jumps at shadows on the walls. But then he goes outside and he sees a sad-looking Tails, who's upset that he lost Sonic's power ring because now he let the team down and he might get in trouble. Right away, this shows us that Tails doesn't just tolerate Antoine. He likes him at least enough that he'll talk to him about how he's feeling. And we soon see why, when Antoine quickly offers to retrieve the ring for Tails. But then Tails reveals where it is.
Роботрополис, да. Ну, кстати, прикольно, что они реализовали его акцент во многих моментах. Keep up the stitch.
Robotropolis, the heart of Robotnik's territory. Still, Antoine is unwilling to back down and says he's going to get it despite his clear discomfort. Now, Antoine doing this is undeniably stupid. He doesn't have the skill to survive alone in Robotnik's land, but it comes from a good place. He promised this kid he would help him, and no matter what, he's going to do it. This way, his one-sided rivalry with Sonic isn't just used to make him seem pathetic. It's used to push him to become braver and better, even if the steps he takes to get there are sometimes silly. From here, Tails excitedly tells Bunny what Antoine is up to, and she vanishes. We cut to Antoine sneaking around Robotropolis, narrowly avoiding death and disaster through mere chance. Or so it seems. Because yep, Bunny has been following him the whole way, protecting him from the shadows and making sure Antoine survives this mission. So now we're given more of a reason to like Bunny as well. The moment she hears one of her teammates might be in danger, she rushes to help them and handily defeats Robotnik's baddies. But she still wants to let Antoine feel like a hero, so she lets him have his moment with Tails. But he tells Tails something key. That was not brave. That was foolishness. Never do such a risk yourself, Tails. At first, it seems like Antoine might just be saying that because he's talking to a kid, with how he and Tails agree to keep this a secret. But then he turns to Bunny and thanks her and gives her a smooch, saying that this will be their secret.
Ну ничего, потом секретик перерастет во что-то воистину шикарное.
So Antoine wasn't as clueless as he seemed. He knew that Bunny saved him and that without her, he wouldn't have succeeded. And his ego isn't bruised by this. He's thankful that his friend was there for him and that he has a partner he knows he can trust in the future. Obviously, these are just two small stories, but they contextualize Antoine's actions in a way that make him far more likable and engaging even when he's just being used for gags. And honestly, even the original miniseries, which happened a good while before any of this stuff, establishes his positive traits pretty well, giving him some nice moments with Sonic and playing up his ego in a way that makes him look competent since it's to help Sally. Overall, Antoine stands as a prime example of how this comic can take the show's material and build something better without entirely changing what it is. What I mean is that Antoine is still Antoine, he's still a coward sometimes, and he still has a massive ego. the comic simply made it so that his cowardice was no longer his defining feature. If anything, his ego is now, and that ego compels him to fight despite his fear and to help save his friends the best way he knows how. Then there's Bunny. While her strength was her biggest contribution to the team in the original show, now she feels like an even bigger powerhouse, and she's given a few moments to show why she's a fan favorite. The sweet girl who can also kick your butt halfway across Texas is just a fun contrast. But now with this Antoine story, she has an added layer to her character. And then there's the little romance bubbling with her thinking Antoine is really brave and, yeah baby, I'm here for it. And that's not all they do with Bunny. Now later we get to this chapter where we see Bunny's fear that her body will betray her and that she'll hurt her friends. Again, we're exploring other sides of these characters, digging into who they are, viewing them from multiple angles, and that's exactly what I want from a long-running, mostly episodic story like this. But this Antoine story's final main character is no slouch either, because Tails is great. The Michael Jordan of the Freedom...
Кроме одной вещи. Как уже говорил Цвета, блять, он, не знаю, он вообще не выглядит как Тейлс. Вот посветлее, вот просто рыжий дайте ему и все, потому что здесь он больше похож на какого-то волчонка, блять.
Freedom fighters, if you will. This little guy's got a lot going for him in these early issues. He's cute, lovable, eager to please, and genuinely hardworking, even if sometimes his ambition can get him into trouble. After all, even when he ate from the Mobian Tree of Wisdom, he still ended up needing to be rescued by Sonic. To Tails' dismay, this leads to him often being coddled by the rest of the Freedom Fighters. However, that doesn't mean that he's dead weight, and while his contributions are usually small or accidental, his dedication to the team always pays off in the long run, and his love and admiration for Sonic is incredibly endearing. Case in point, we have issue 20, where after a botched mission, Sonic turns invisible and everyone thinks he's dead. However, out of all the Freedom Fighters, Tails is the only one who refuses to believe it.
Dear Sonic, I know you're alive, so I left this note. We're on our way to Robotropolis to avenge your death. Your loyal pal, Tails. P.S. If you are dead, then pay no attention to this letter.
And hilariously, it's only because of this
Ой, блядь, прекраснейший абсурд. Просто мое почтение.
letter that Sonic is able to find and save his friends from Robotnik. So, even if Tails isn't always directly useful, his loyalty to the group and his hero sure is. However, as time progresses, Tails starts to get some side stories all to himself, like when he saves the Sonic fan convention from Robotnik, defeats Pseudo-Sonic, or has his first encounter with Octobot. While these victories may be smaller in scale, they're his. More than most interpretations of the character, the comic really leans into Tails being a little kid, and it's the act of consistently watching him rise to the occasion and do his best that makes this version of his character so compelling. Just seeing that Tails really is becoming a hero, like Sonic. He's even got the witty one-liners down.
What? Do I look like a slave?
Actually, you look like 5 slaves, but who's counting?
Wait, what? It also
Ну, я бы тоже сказал 6. Судя вот именно по внешнему виду нынеш, ну, местного работника, то, я думаю, там 6. А даже и 7 поместится рабов. Хорошая тема для иссякая, но не сейчас.
also helps that Tails' desire to be treated like a grown-up results in some really wild stories. For example, in issue 28 and 29, Tails, on the hunt for adventure, arrives on this island where he falls in love with a red fox named Fiona. The two really hit it off, but then it's revealed that Fiona is actually one of Robotnik's bots. While Tails succeeds in escaping Robotnik's trap, you've got to feel bad for the kid. After all, he would have been able to live it up with the perfect woman if only she'd been waterproofed. Thus...
Сука. Не, ну потом, конечно, она снова вернется, только там уже будет такое, как сказать... Она, по-моему, уже будет с этим, как его... С Кёрджем. По-моему, уже так. Ну, блядь, там на самом деле такой сюжет это задумано. Ну, хотя, что вы хотите? Там более 500 выпусков.
Tails leaves the rusted husk of the robot love of his life behind, a monument to their brief yet incredibly formative encounter. Some say Robo Fiona is still out there on that island, crying, alone, wishing that, in some other dimension, in some other time, it could have been different. The Archie Sonic comic is truly a tragedy. From here, Tails continues his submarine journey. He meets the Down Under and 40 Fathoms Freedom Fighters, fights Octobot and Crocbot, recounts his adventures as Captain
Super for X-Men.
Super Foxman, the mutant cyborg clone. and finds out that he's the chosen one of destiny. But that's a tale for another time. Finally, he helps put an end to one of Robotnik's schemes.
Ебать, это что за смесь этого кожеголового из черепашек ниндзя и гребаного вектора? Что это за хрень? А, ну конечно же. Ой, mate, I have an Australian head. Because I'm a fucking crocodile. Ёбаный крокодил Данди. Вот, сука, стоило этому фильму быть и сразу. Крокодил равно австралиец, блять.
Tails was right, but only partially. He can do a lot to help, but he can't do it alone. He needs a team to be there with him if he's really gonna make a change in the world at large. It's a cute little arc for him, and one that endeared me to his character just a little more.
И, блядь, он впервые, по-моему, за видео стал рыжим. Ура! Аллилуйя, блядь, наконец-то он себя
На той обложке с НАКУЗом тоже был рыжий.
Ну, отчасти, но все равно, блин, понимаешь, приятно видеть хотя бы, что он наконец-таки смыл себе всю эту какашечную пыль, которая осталась после войны. Ура! Ура! Помылся, наконец-то, мудила.
Just a little more. But this expansion of the world and its characters doesn't stop there. Now, the comics got plenty of its own ideas. And sometimes those ideas are, what is that thing? Well, that's an exceptionally versatile Evolvinoid. It was created from the DNA of Robotnik and Sonic, made by the Doctor with a single directive. Destroy.
Ну, как всегда, старая добрая схема, смешиваем ДНК главного злодея и главного врага, и получается какая-то страшная ебанина, которая страшнее обоих.
Your father, aka Sonic the Hedgehog. However, over the course of a single issue, it transforms multiple times and ultimately achieves enlightenment, realizing that Robotnik is its true limitation and that he must be destroyed. So it fries Robotnik, then turns to Sonic, ready to destroy him too. But Sonic talks it down, saying that its real limitation is its programming, and it must go against that programming to truly break free from its restraints. This way it gains independent thought and evolves further, entering the endless expanse of space. It's a story that, by the end, feels pretty out there, but the following story takes this even further. Because, as it turns out, Robotnik wasn't murdered by Eve. Instead, he was sent to an alternate dimension where he meets Robo-Robotnik. No, not that one. This one. Robo-Robotnik.
А, это разные, блядь, все-таки. Как это работает?
Sonic and an last-ditch effort to preserve.
Это работает так же, как в Sailor Moon. Есть Чибиуса, а есть Чиби-Чибиуса.
Ну или как в этом, блядь, как его... Как в Sonic Rush'ах и в Sonic Rivals. Там постоянно все меняется. То с Эгман Нега это альтернативная версия, то Эгман Нега это вообще другая версия. То есть они вообще, они сами...
Не-не-не, по канону Эгман Нега является наследником.
Так прикол в том, что в этих играх там реально было то, что в одной игре говорилось, что он из альтернативного мира, а в другой игре говорилось, что он наследник его. То есть они там меньше, как сказать, между Райвелсом и Рашем там были разногласия по поводу этих персонажей. Я вот это вообще не понял, блядь, зачем? Создайте просто то, что он, блин, либо наследник, либо из другой вселенной, и все. Зачем, блядь, было делать эту ебанину, и чтобы фанаты потом сидели и ломали башку?
What was left? Downloaded his robot soul into a satellite station he'd built. Unfortunately for him, though, at the time, it was functionally useless. Now, Robo-Robotnik spends his days wallowing in space, waiting for his inevitable power failure. However, our Robotnik won't have any of that, and encourages him to keep up the fight. The war isn't over for either of them. And as thanks for reinvigorating his cold, dead heart, Robo-Robotnik sends our Robotnik back home to the planet Mobius, where everyone is gonna die. Because Robotnik ensured that, in the event of his demise, Operation Wasteland would commence, wherein his robot army would raze the land to ash and dirt. Because if
чем ты раньше занимался? Почему сразу нельзя было так сделать?
Robotnik can't have this world, then no one can. Our heroes are so caught off guard that they don't even know what to do, until at the last minute they're saved by a familiar voice. Robotnik takes so much sick pleasure letting Sonic know how much the freedom fighters' lives are in his hands. And to rub it in, he lets them leave, stating that,
"Next time will be of my own choosing, Hedgehog, when you least expect it. There's been no gain, there's been no loss. We shall live to fight another day."
Speaking of the madman himself, Robotnik, when he's not being terrifying, he is hysterical.
О, здесь он более каноничный.
Это Бум!
А, ну, кстати, да, реально Бум.
The deliciously evil dictator who hates laughing, singing, reading, animals, dancing, plants, religion, and even women. Everything about him is icky and gross in just the right way. I mean, my man drinks and sweats 10W40. Even commit.
Он серьезно пьет ВДшечку вот эту, что ли, блядь? Мать твою, мужик, ты ебанутый.
Federal offenses such as stealing Sonic fan mail from the US Postal Service, a truly heinous crime. But hey, that's what makes him a supervillain on the cutting edge. And man, does he have fun being terrible. In fact, it sometimes makes it easy to forget just how horrible a person he really is. This stand-in for all things greedy and destructive, decimating the environment not only for his own gain, but because he enjoys watching others suffer. He's a villain who's an absolute joy to sit with, especially if, like me, you read his dialogue with his sad AM voice in mind.
Sonic the Hedgehog has been a thorn in my side, but girls just want to have fun.
Бля.
Then there's the way he plays off other characters, his robots, and his poor nephew Snively. Man, he is such a monster to everyone, and I love him for it. His henchmen are just as fun, from his badniks who have a ton of personality to his SWAT bots that know that when Sonic is around, it's best to just call it quits and off yourself out of spite. It seems Robotnik requires all his henchmen to refer to him by over-the-top evil titles. And just seeing Robotnik rally his troops or have a company picnic is inherently funny.
Welcome back, Ivo. Это мило.
Snively is great too. His best outing for me is easily when he accidentally gains full control of Robotnik's forces when the big man is lost in the void. Suddenly, all of his bottled up ego is on full display as he starts wearing Robotnik's clothes and talking all high and mighty. It's really funny how bold he gets. Even better is the fact that while Snively shares his uncle's intellect, he is so incompetent and brash in his execution that he almost destroys the planet in a single day.
Да.
With the freedom fighters deciding to set Robotnik free to reverse Snively's screw-up, since having to deal with a calculating dictator is better than dealing with a cataclysmic moron. The best part? Robotnik decides to spare Snively's life so that he can make him miserable for all that's left of it. Robotnik is really the glue that holds a lot of this early comic together. Like, yeah, I've highlighted a lot of fun issues and worthwhile stories, but honestly, there are a good number where the concepts or execution isn't bad, but it also isn't all that good. However, when you have Robotnik in there, well, for some reason, every writer and artist seems to have a unified understanding of what makes him fun to read. And as such, regardless of whatever else is going on, you can always count on Robotnik bringing the spice you need. He elevates the comic through and through. Much like Tammy, I've got to admit, I think I might be in love. Overall, I'm impressed by how this silly little comic treats all these characters with genuine weight and respect, when it could have easily left them as simple, static gags. Even more impressive is that it almost never uses that serious side of them to undermine the silly side, or vice versa. Instead, both of these tones are given room to breathe, creating characters more fully realized, engaging, and lovable than I ever expected them to be. However, as the world of Archie Sonic became more cohesive, the writers developed a greater interest in telling serious, long-running tales. But before it fully committed to that tone, there was a trilogy of issues that combined the best of both worlds, of the serious and the silly, to create a story that I love far more than any of the others I'd read so far.
Давай, что это?
Какая же эта песня японская.
Японская, но шикарная. Черт
Её
подери.
как будто из Якудзы.
В какой-то степени.
Let's start with what you've been looking at, the art. Man, the art in Mecha Madness is great. All these drawings were done by Patrick Spaziante, or Spaz for short. Now, this isn't Spaz's first issue on the series. He was the artist that brought the comic Sonic CD adaptation to life. He drew a bunch of really cool covers, and was more than half the reason the Eve storyline felt so otherworldly. Overall, though, he still hasn't done nearly as many issues as Manic and Mawini. But when he's here, he brings a lot of his own style to the comic, while still retaining many of the other artist's strengths. Like, the characters remain incredibly expressive with their
Кстати говоря, кроме цвета, Тейлз наконец-то выглядит хорошо.
facial expressions getting across a ton of personality, especially with Robotnik. However, he does have certain qualities that make his work stand out sometimes. The main thing being just how much is going on. At certain points, it can honestly get a bit overwhelming, but the vast majority of the time, it manages to be busy yet organized. His art, combined with the panel layouts, makes reading an absolute breeze. For an action-packed issue like this one, it's hard to overstate how much Spaz's work adds to the story. Really, Mecha Madness is a tour de force of Spaz's detailed, dynamic work on this comic. In particular, the fights here, Spaz nails these poses. Each punch has proper impact. Each page has something
Ну да.
eye-catching. Overall, Spaz is a great addition to the art team of Archie
Охля.
Джулиан молится на эту обложку.
Sonic, and will only continue to improve his craft and create some of the most dynamic and excellent pieces of Sonic artwork, despite his obvious and unfortunate biases.
And do you admit to draw Sonic more heroic than moi?
Yes, it's all true. I confess, take me away.
But that's enough about the art. The
Ладно,
writing
это было
is
странно.
equally strong. See, this story was written by Mike Gallagher, who's been responsible for many of the series' goofier issues. But here, he shows off his ability to balance that silliness with some serious stakes for the characters. This story begins with Sonic telling the Freedom Fighters about his brilliant plan. He's going to get roboticized on purpose and use the neural overrider that this guy invented to keep his free will. This should give him the extra bit of power they need to destroy Robotnik, and he can do it from the inside. Now, Sally was already purposely roboticized in a previous issue, and that plan went awry. So the others are...
То есть ее уже... Хотя да, учитывая кучу обложек, просто я помню точно какую-то историю читал, которую ее роботизировали.
all against another risky scheme. Of course, Sonic thinks that things will go different this time because it's him. But still, his plan is rejected, and he leaves annoyed. Right off the bat, what I like about this scene is how it fleshes out Sally. There's a real sense that she's tired of having these types of conversations with Sonic and constantly having to reel in his impulses. But more than that, she's offended by Antoine's total lack of faith in him, with Antoine suspecting that Sonic might go rogue and do his plan anyway.
Ну, это, кстати, довольно странное отношение Антуана, учитывая, как он влюблен в mon amour, но при этом ей не доверяет. Учитывая, что Салли много чего сделала, и она отличный стратег. Как-то странно со стороны этого трусливого хуя.
So while Sally may sometimes get fed up with Sonic's shenanigans, that doesn't mean that she forgets the relationship or all that Sonic's done for the team. And she's definitely still willing to stand up for him. This way, she isn't treated as a one-sided caricature, as Sonic's love interest or a single-minded leader. Instead, these two sides of her are balanced, and that serves to make her feel more real and respectable, creating a character who's far more engaging to me. From here, the plot kicks into gear as Sonic manages to get what he wants in the worst way possible, because Knack the Weasel kidnaps him and takes him to Robotnik. Soon enough, our hero is none other than Mechasonic, and he's given the sole mission to destroy Knothole. An interesting thing to note here is that as a display of Mechasonic's strength, Robotnik has him destroy a gigantic form of crab meat. Prior to Snively, and even during his early days in the comic, Crab Meat was Robotnik's sidekick of sorts. But after this issue, he's completely retired from that position, and Robotnik never rebuilds him again. In retrospect, it's a cool way for the comic to inadvertently say, hey, things are about to change. And at first, it looks like they will for the worst, as our heroes seem to be no match for Mechasonic. But this is where one freedom fighter, Bunny Rabbit, truly gets to shine, and I love how she's handled here.
Ну да, редизайн у нее шикарный.
Before, we already knew that she was a powerhouse, but now that aspect of her character is cranked to 11 as she blasts Metal Sonic with lasers,
Но имеется в виду, что у нее дизайн стал такой больше мегаменовский.
flies through the sky and uses her extendo legs to dodge his attacks. She just puts up a great fight and does so well that Robotnik has to personally interfere to stop her. And even then, she gets right back up and fights long enough to allow the team time to call for backup and evacuate Knothole.
Вот чуть-чуть, вот буквально чуть-чуть цвет поменять, и все, и Тейлз будет идеальный.
While she's not the main hero of the story, she still manages to help save the day, creating the most memorable and extreme moment for the character up until now, and solidifying her as an awesome inclusion to the cast. In the end, though, she's still unable to defeat Mechasonic, leaving the group with one option. They can use their very same Portabot, the roboticized bunny from all the way back in issue 3 to transform someone else into a mecha. The hope here being that they'll be able to retain their individual identity with the Overrider and defeat Mechasonic in the process. Understandably, many of the Freedom Fighters don't like this plan. It was a last resort after all, and as silly as this comic can be, Here, Gallagher clearly understands that it's important to show how these critters have been impacted by Robotnik's deeds. They have an extremely adverse reaction to anything related to robots.
Немножко напоминает, вот в некоторых моментах немножко напоминает концовку Earthbound, где это, чтобы попасть к главному злодею Гайгасу, детям приходится поместить свои разумы в роботов, чтобы переместиться, потому что это вот устройство по перемещению во времени не может перемещать это органику. Довольно жуткая сцена на самом деле. И в целом вообще такая концепция того, что вы, так сказать, вашего любимого персонажа потеряете, что он просто станет бездушным роботом, довольно хорошо, так сказать, может это пошалить нервишки читателя.
Even if it could help save them. Still, Sally proves herself as a leader, making the tough decision to roboticize one of their own in order to save Knothole. Once again, it's great that we get to see more sides of her, this royal-born leader and this girl who wants to live a normal life, as she's capable of jumping in to whack some sense into Knuckles, but also gets lost in their conversations about times they spent together in their childhood. Speaking of which, yeah, Knuckles is the one who gets roboticized, and there's no better choice from a narrative
красота.
perspective or from a pure entertainment value point of view. Now we don't just have another Sonic and Knuckles fight. They're in these robotic forms, flying in the sky, blasting
Вот без шуток, реально постер где-нибудь вот найти бы такой повесить.
forefront of the action. Knuckles himself continues to be an absolute treat with how he shows no hesitation to be roboticized or his ridiculous one-liners. Like, to quote Knuckles, to paraphrase Hendrix, "Excuse me, while I diss this guy." Still, this action could feel a bit empty
Yep.
if Sonic's personality was entirely
Чертов Purple Haze. Ну, спасибо за такую
я
отсылочку.
думала, там поется Kiss the Sky, типа.
Ну, это, по-моему, там поменяли немного для контекста.
missing. After all, part of the fun of seeing these guys clash comes down to their interactions. And that's why it's
Чё у
great
нас
that
там,
here,
блядь?
Sonic
Этот Purple Haze, Foxy Lady, Little Wing. Что у нас? А, Stone Free.
Да до хера песня, на самом деле, это, которую можно интерпретировать. Да хера, бля. Мне нравится, что они это интерпретировали то, что многие модельки делали на скелетной анимации при помощи шариков, они это интерпретировали в броню Мехасоника. Выглядит прикольно, как такие вот крутые шарниры.
seeing these guys clash comes down to their interactions. And that's why it's great that here, Sonic starts fighting Robotnik's controls a bit. Even when he could have been reduced to nothing more than a piece of the plot, Gallagher finds a way to show his strength and heroism. He won't simply let himself be used by Robotnik. He will fight back, and in doing so, give Knuckles the upper hand he needs to stop him before it's too late. I mean, if he hadn't done that, Robotnik might have retrieved the coordinates to Knothole, and who knows what horrible things he would have done then. Oh yeah, and I also like how Sonic regains enough free will to let himself act as a cushion for Mecha Knuckles to crash into. Though of course, Mecha Knuckles also just wins because he's cool and because he wasn't roboticized in one of Robotnik's pesky newer roboticizers with their inferior foreign parts. After the battle is finished though, Sonic is barely hanging on to his life. Of course, Sally is sobbing. She thinks Sonic's gone, and here we get to see her genuine emotional reaction to that, all without undermining the fun of the story, as it's soon revealed that Sonic can be turned back to normal using the 1 billionth power ring he collected in a previous issue. Yet another fun little callback, and while it could feel cheap, the larger-than-life stakes and absurdity of this story allow me to accept a just-as-ridiculous solution fairly easily. After all, this arc is very silly with some laughably melodramatic dialogue throughout. Hearing Sonic lament about how he doesn't deserve to live for nearly killing his friends is as hilarious as it is heartbreaking. And honestly,
довольно интересный такой парадокс.
I wouldn't change any of it. It's what makes this arc so entertaining. How all of its emotions are cranked up to the max. It's unhinged in all the right ways, bolstered by the just as over-the-top art. So I'm more than willing to let a couple contrivances slide. And so, with Sonic back to normal, all is well, and Mecha Madness comes to a close. Or it would if it wasn't for the fact that everyone thinks Sonic got roboticized on purpose, and his plans simply fell through. So these guys believe that he willingly put everyone's lives at risk. And who can blame them? He pushes for this roboticization plan, leaves, and comes back the same day as Mecha Sonic? Yeah, seems pretty clear to me. So this story isn't over yet, because now Sonic needs to go on trial. I really like what this does for some of these characters. Amy is absolutely adorable, standing outside the jail, picketing for Sonic's release.
Вот я вижу, что у него здесь другой дизайн.
Шоушенк, серьезно.
And dunking on Antoine. Then there's Sally, and this is the perfect challenge for her. After all, what better way is... Then there's Sally.
А по факту, только с этим, с желудем.
And this is the perfect challenge for her. After all, what better way is there to encapsulate her struggle between her individual wants and her responsibilities as a leader than this? Than having to abide by her own rules and try Sonic for his crimes, even though she so clearly doesn't want to. Meanwhile, Antoine's hilarious...
Я хотела сказать, что в принципе, если бы Элиз из 06 была бы более, как себе сказать...
Фурийный.
Ну, это тоже, но нет, по сути, более, что ли, я не знаю...
Ответственный, более важный.
Более важный, да, это по сути Салли. То есть, ну, они типа пытались сделать Салли вторую.
Только, блядь, Элиз, она бесполезный кусок сценарного кода, так сказать. И вообще, сценарного письма. Вообще, в целом, я не понимаю, нахуй она там нужна, кроме того, что в ней содержится ебанина, как говорится. Ну, по факту, в ней заключена главная ебанина.
Про любую женщину.
То есть, реально, если бы не то, что в ней содержится, как говорится, главный корень, ну, проблем, то все, она нахер бы не нужна бы. Я не знаю, кто бы что ни писал, но по мне она вообще бесполезный персонаж.
In this issue. He's so excited to get Sonic in trouble for this. Now, this could easily make him annoying, but I think it only works in his favor here because he has every reason to believe Sonic did this, and Sonic has been a bully to him in the past. For Antoine, this is just Sonic getting what he deserves, and the way he goes about this, saying that he'll make it brief, but then going on and on and on. Man, there are some great jokes here, my favorite of which is here. My man is absolutely harassing this poor girl. Stop badgering the witness. Then there's Sonic. Gallagher absolutely nails his character. Where Antoine has this bloated, long-winded response, Sonic gets straight to the point, outlining all the reasons why they should believe him and explaining that it was Knack the Weasel who was responsible. And though he doesn't manage to convince everyone that he's innocent, Sally is willing to use her position to help him. She'll give him 24 hours to prove that this wasn't his fault. After that, though, well, it'll be out of her hands. Again, Sally may sometimes seem to be a hindrance to Sonic, but when push comes to shove, she's in his corner, and she'll do whatever she reasonably can to balance her affections for him and her duties as a leader. From here, the story becomes extremely straightforward, and that's because my boy Sonic becomes a force of nature. This man bulldozes his way into a bar, fights a bunch of old retired badniks, and not only tricks Knack into thinking he's been defeated, but then allows him to drive all the way to Robotropolis.
Как он здесь отвратительно нарисован.
Он здесь похож на раннего персонажа из Скуби-Ду.
О, да.
Реально, как будто ебучая Ханна-Барбера рисовала. Ну, что с ним такое?
Just so he can knock him out, call up Robotnik, and tell him that he's just sent a nice little exploding present to his doorstep, because screw you. Sonic...
Ой, я себе, блядь...
Переводчик матерится.
Причем это автоматический перевод. То есть для автоматического переводчика просто screw you, типа пошел на... Для него это пошел нахуй.
Я когда еще видела, так думала, нихуя себе, автор что, матерится?
Apprehends the rat, throws him at the feet of the princess, and then reveals that he took apart his parole tracker to make a gas filter, providing a goofy explanation for how he wasn't knocked out. He breaks the very thing that was meant to prove his loyalty, so he can use it as a weapon to 100% clear his name. Really, it's just fun watching the hero have such a clear goal and executing it with perfect skill and focus. And it's a great continuation of the merging of wackiness and coolness that this comic promised us in Mecha Madness. And while Sally is incredibly happy Sonic has cleared his name, she's still upset with herself for doubting him, and says that she'll make a public apology. But Sonic won't have it. There's no time for fanfare. He needs to get moving again. This is one of those moments that really sells them as a likable pair. As soon as she can be, Sally is fully on Sonic's side, ready to humble herself and maybe even undermine her position as leader to make things right. But Sonic doesn't just move fast, he forgives her fast, and he's willing to look past these issues because at the end of the day, he tries to understand what Sally is going through. All in all, this 3-issue story manages to perfectly blend the comedy of the comic with some higher stakes, cool character moments, and endlessly fun action. The comedy of the comic with some higher stakes, cool character moments.
Бля, очень красивая панель.
Прям Мегаменом воняет.
Воняет, но, господи, как же это красиво нарисовано. Честно. Блин, реально, хоть, знаете, распечатываешь, но просто на стену вешаешь.
It's an endlessly fun action. It's a blast from start to finish. And the perfect story to really show just how bonkers early Archie Sonic can be. Great job, Mr. Gallagher. In fact, great jobs are in order for all these writers. Angelo De Cesare for breathing new life into Antoine and establishing what will become one of my favorite couples. Rich Kozlowski
Что, из-за имени?
for providing...
А, Анжела. Ну, понимаю.
Нет.
А,
Extra depth to Bunny, Kent Taylor and Paul Castiglia for some decent one-offs, and the dynamic duo of Mike Kantarovich and Ken Penders for introducing the multiverse, and so many other cool concepts into the comic for Sonic to play around with, as well as creating a wonderfully sweet moment for Sonic and Sally, and nailing a likable portrayal of Knuckles from the very start. And of course, a great job to all these writers for the many laughs.
ну, Кен еще потом вернется, и там будет...
Кто вернется?
Вот этот Кен Пендерс, немножко ошибся в фамилии, короче, да он когда вернется, это будет жесть. Ты ж помнишь те арты, где персонажи Соника рисовались такими довольно реалистичными чертами?
Это
очень...
где вот тот кривой Шэдоу?
Да.
Щас.
Не кривой Шэдоу, где типа у него тут еблап, где вот персонажи Соника, которых, то есть там были такие вот ехидные, но у них такие, знаешь, как будто человеческие черты были.
However, does this mean that you should run out to your local comic shop and grab these bad boys off the shelf? Well, no.
Нормальный
You can't. They aren't on sale anymore, and they cost like $1 bajillion secondhand online. Try
$49? Ну прям баджилин перебор.
Trust me, I've looked. I want them.
Не знаю, за $40 нормально, я считаю, слушайте. Хороший комик взять, чем даже если там несколько штук.
But besides that, even if I think they're minor, I do feel that this era has some small problems that anyone thinking about getting into the comic should be aware of. At the start, Sonic's ego and general characterization can be a bit too mean-spirited at times, usually towards Antoine. Then there's Rotor, who, wow, I kind of forgot about this guy. And that's not because he's awful or anything, he's just normal. Even in the stories focused on his personal struggles, he doesn't have much in the way of defining character traits or something for me to really latch onto. It's a problem some of the stories in this era have, where they'll prioritize a character's role in the plot over endearing me to them through their characterization, which can weaken a lot of the introductions of newer faces. And finally, almost every issue has some degree of characters narrating what's on the page, which I can already see, guys. But there's a reason I didn't pause to focus on this stuff earlier.
Что там?
These things really didn't bother me that much. Sonic being a bit off? Well, it's only for a few issues, and he quickly gets way better. Some characters I didn't care for, there are way more I like, and it's not like these unlikable members get that much time devoted to them. How about a somewhat boring plot every now and then with some weak dialogue sprinkled throughout?
Snooch the Boghawk. Бля.
It's hard to get all that caught up on those when most of these stories are super snappy, so I always knew that there was another cool idea.
Бля, ну тут прям уже какой-то остробой. Немножко напоминает это арку с Плутоном.
Right around the corner. Basically, the baseline level of quality in this comic is consistently good enough that I'm more than willing to overlook its occasional small shortcomings. Because more than anything, this comic is fun. Really fun. With its fast-paced, colorful cast, varied humor, and delightfully absurd tone, it was consistently...
Охренеть, блин. 500 выпусков, черт побери, 500 штук с 90-х по 2017 год. Бля, я честно поражаюсь тому, как долго Соник от Арчи прожил.
A fun addition to my week as I was reading through this era. And I was surprised that I was already starting to...
Не, ну там тоже, само собой, хорошо. Ну, как я сказал, hit or miss. Есть действительно офигенная история, есть... Говно!
Care about some of these characters, familiar or otherwise. Much like the Saturday morning cartoons of my childhood, this comic was my comfort food. But this wasn't the cheap stuff. Nah, we're eating that good sponsored cereal today, boys and girls. More importantly though, Mecha Madness and other stories like it made me realize something. If this series keeps going like this, if it keeps building off its crazy concepts in fun and creative ways, continues to be filled with this feeling of excitement as it tells more long-running tales, and more than anything else, keeps these lovable characters at the forefront, well, it could take that next step and turn into something truly great.
Okay,
so I was ready to keep on juicing and jamming for many, many issues to come.
What's the next?
Don't celebrate too soon. It's my turn.
Нет. Это концовка с АТМа, которая она закончилась на клиффхенгере.
What you just saw was the final scene of Sonic Sat AM. Though the story was left open for some sort of continuation, that would never come to fruition, at least not in any official capacity. For a time, though, that wasn't entirely clear. I mean, there was always the possibility it could be renewed or come back after a couple years, and so the Archie Sonic comic trucked along. telling its own stories. However, according to writer Ken Penders, by the time the comic reached its 36th issue in May of 1996, Archie Comics editor Scott Fulop thought the comic wasn't long for this world. And I can see why. This comic, for all its own strengths, still had a ton of its identity rooted in that show. And with it gone, and its unique cast of characters going almost completely unused by Sega, what purpose did it serve anymore? The writing was on the wall. So, armed with this information, Penders began to develop the series finale. Because if the story was gonna end, it might as well have an actual ending, right? As such, from issue 37 onward, the comic quested toward that aptly titled endgame, a 4-part finale that would cap off the story and give us the final showdown between Sonic the Hedgehog and Dr. Robotnik. But this wouldn't be like their previous fights. No, with the exception of a few silly stories, the issue's post-Mecha Madness made their intentions clear. It was time to put those jokes aside, get serious, and march into war. Tyranny. Like a dark cloud, it shadows a land, causing the valiant to rebel. Creating war, its soldiers are often called freedom fighters, who are sometimes driven to desperate acts, even against those who've attempted neutrality. A position in war the fabled floating island has been unable to maintain as its natives look for hope from its guardian, the one being they depend on to protect them from the desperate acts of those in search of freedom and their war's invasion. Something Knuckles the Echidna never thought he would have to contend with from the likes of Sonic the Hedgehog. The Hedgehog.
Учиться ненавидеть? О, ну ладно.
There are many problems with this section of Archie's Sonic, but they all appear in the endgame storyline. So we'll be using it to describe a bunch of the ways the comic has broken down since Mecha Madness, along with addressing a few extra problems with the comic that sure had always been there, but it hadn't become major until now. Let's just start with the prologue to Endgame, issue 46. Here, our heroes are gathered around the campfire, meeting with allies both old and new. And this meeting exists to get the reader to ask one key question. Is there a traitor among the freedom fighters? Everything that happens in the story is in service of that, with everyone pointing fingers and yelling and getting real ticked off. So this conflict is obviously about the characters, about their worries, fears, weaknesses, and you get the picture. The story itself, however, doesn't end with us finding out who the supposed traitor is. Instead, this is used as a framing device to show how our heroes act when...
А там много, на самом деле, персонажей было в мультфильме. Там, опять же, быки, скунсы. Там просто куча было персонажей, таких антропоморфных животных, которые присоединялись к сопротивлению.
Put under such
По
intense pressure.
сути, ёпта, это зачем должны были быть форсы?
То есть, да, там отказались от людей, фурийные животные, но с хорошей проработкой. Я не знаю, я пытался полюбить форсы, найти какие-то плюсы в них, но реально, вот... Как бы я не говорил, что вот да, вот Сумочкин, конечно, перебарщил в некоторых моментах в обзоре, но с одним я соглашусь, ты, сука, не веришь в эту историю вообще. Я в жизни понял, что Соника пытали, что они там боролись за что-то, что это масштабная битва, где куча...
Я бы поверила, если бы нам показали, как их а то нам показали, как там то он какую-то кучку фурийных жителей запугивал, то Инфинит там что-то пиздел.
Потом черный экранчик с текстом.
Да.
Нахуй, я не понимаю, это реально бред, ощущается как бред какой-то.
Which, unfortunately, reveals just how much one particular character has degraded over the course of the comic's run, to the point where now, a disgusting stench follows her wherever she goes. Now, despite how much praise I gave her in Mecha Madness, I've had mostly mixed feelings on Sally for a lot of the comic. For example, in that Larry Link story we talked about earlier, Sally is so quick to leave this guy behind to fend for himself because of his bad luck, which when contrasted by how willing Sonic is to help Larry out and find him a new home, makes her feel pretty cold. This early in the comic, moments like that often left a bad first impression of her character as someone needlessly stubborn and vain, especially since those were the few times the writers chose to make her stand out as more than a background gag. However, as the comic went on, she improved, and I felt myself warming up to her and caring more about her struggles. Sally works best for me when she's bouncing off Sonic, or when her responsibilities as a leader conflict with her personal desires, yet she pushes forward without a second thought, standing strong and committing to tough decisions. Sometimes she can even look pretty cool when the right artist is on the job. Sadly though, the comic focused on these traits pretty sparingly, and as such, Sally's characterization started to settle into the sad princess or the competent one. a character who doesn't want help and needs only rely on herself for emotional support. Unfortunately for me though, it was her moments of vulnerability that made her kinda likable and endearing. So yeah, with the comic not having much in the way of that, I felt pretty disconnected from Sally at this point. And that seems to be a problem that the Princess Sally miniseries was meant to solve.
Sally was going to encounter her mother. We were going to make the mother the villain. Sega thought that was too dark, so Sally and Bunny Rabbit took a road trip. Sega said nope. So then they came back and they asked us, how about all we can use is Sally and all we can use is Robot? Everything else has to be original.
Все должно быть. Вот у тебя как Sega со всем этим вмешивалась. Очень странно как-то, учитывая, что потом все эти события, по сути, ничего не сыграют в играх. То есть ни Салли, ни Freedom Fighter, ничего этого не будет. Вот, честно скажу, обидно по одной простой причине. Потому что по факту весь этот сюжет можно было бы идеально интерпретировать для кого-нибудь...
Да для тех же.
Да, по факту. Знаете... Честно, у меня такое ощущение, что рано или поздно Sega, но... Ну что примкнет, они дотронутся до темы мультивселенной. Потому что я был бы рад увидеть игру, в которой...
Ага, будет у нас опять спойлер-верс, знаем, уже плавали.
Не, ну имеется в виду, действительно, знаешь, где там это, СОНИК, знаешь, типа,
подожди,
с комиксными
Prime.
сериями. Там Prime, хотя да, Prime нет, но он затрагивал лишь несколько вселенных. Ну ладно, это тоже считается.
So, okay, no mother-daughter drama, no road trip with a friend. What do we have instead? Well, on the surface, the plot is simple. Sally trains a new group of freedom fighters and they eventually destroy one of Robotnik's bases. But here's the thing. Sally isn't actually Sally for over half of this miniseries. Now, this is one of Robotnik's robot doubles and she's just pretending to lead. In the end, it's revealed that the real Sally purposely let herself be captured so that the team could figure out what the fake Sally's plan was. After they learn that, one of her teammates goes along with this deal with Robotnik where he's to swap the two Sallys. But he's actually putting the fake Sally back into the roboticizer and freeing the real one without Robotnik knowing. As such, together they're able to catch Dr. Robotnik by surprise at a critical moment, when his robotic Sally blows up from being roboticized, leading to Sally and her team destroying the Doctor's
Хера себе многоходовочка получилась. Неплохо.
base and ruining his plans to make any more robot doubles in the near future. All in all, these issues are primarily focused on this twist. And while I really can appreciate the thought that went into this, with the fake and real Sally having slightly different colored jackets or different ways each of them refer to... Sorry, I thought I smelled something. Anyway, it's far more important for me at this point to get character-focused conflicts around Sally since she's still being properly defined. So having a twist based around removing her from her own story for a bulk of the time in some misplaced attempt to show that Sally is a good leader, I guess, yeah, it doesn't do much for me or for her character, and I'm not a fan of, Seriously, what is that?
Да, блять, проветри комнату, а то сейчас совсем говно завоняет.
Sorry, my point is that this is how Sally is often treated, moving the plot along, but not doing so in a way that endears me to her. She's competent, sure, but she doesn't feel like a character anymore. She's just the leader, and that's that. At that point, it really makes me wonder what Sally's personality even is, Okay, what is that smell? Oh, it's you. All right, so I'm not a fan of this guy, Jeffrey St. John. He's properly introduced in the Sally miniseries, eventually shows up in the mainline comic book as well, and is a character who somehow, from the moment he appears in an issue, manages to make it worse. And that's because he's always used to bring out the ugly side of the cast. He and other male characters consistently butt heads in unfunny ways, where even if there is a common enemy or a good reason to work together, they won't stop acting like children. As you'd
Понятно, у нас получилась токсичная версия Пепе Ле Пью. Только, блядь, с арбалетом на руке.
expect, this is incredibly
арбалет на руке. Опять привет, Арно.
Ёбаный Арно.
With the worst being his interactions with Sonic.
рожа,
When this
всё
goes
правильно.
on, Sonic's usual cleverness fades away, replaced by some typical angry dude energy. Where Knuckles and Sonic's battles were usually comical misunderstandings that ended with them finding common ground or having a newfound respect for one another, Jeffrey and Sonic's dynamic is dead serious. Two alpha males flexing at each other to impress their woman. However, in the Sally miniseries, where Sonic isn't even present, it's also a problem, because Jeffrey and this boring pig guy named Hamlin spend a lot of time fighting, to the point where their back and forth often feels like the real focus of the story, instead of the titular character who I'd like to know more about. And honestly, as you read more of the story and flip from page to page, you start to realize that that's what happened. This was never a Princess Sally miniseries. This was a Jeffrey St. John special, baby. That's right. Big Jeff is the secret main character. Because when you look at it, this whole story is structured around showing how competent and cool Jeffrey is, getting to see his secret rebel underground, and revealing that Hamlin shouldn't have jumped to conclusions and instead trusted Jeffrey in his leadership. After all, while Sally's away, it's Jeffrey who has to make sure the mission is a success. But no, I'm not impressed, because the way Jeffrey really comes across is as an overly aggressive child. He embodies the most unlikable.
Причем тогда был смысл называть эту историю принцесса Салли, если по факту все сосредоточено на этом чуваке. Нет, серьезно, в чем смысл? Вообще никогда не понимал, когда история называется одним персонажем. То есть прям акцентируется, знаете, даже на постерах этого персонажа показывают, прям вот акцентируют на нем внимание. Но в итоге все.
7-я часть Джорджа тебе ни о чем не говорит.
Не, ну, кстати, подожди, в смысле?
Главный герой Джонни, но большую часть времени мы смотрим историю про Джайра.
Ну, там никак бы не... Я имел в виду, называется. Там же не говорится, что это, опять же, это история Джайра. Там, типа, да, Джордж's Bizarre Adventure, он все еще остается главным героем. Здесь же Салли уходит на какой-то херов план, и при этом какой-то появляется чел по имени вот Джеффри.
Ну, давай признаем честными, Джонни его тоже очень часто на второй план уходил. Там в основном Джайра все разрулит. А в частности, особенно до того, как у Джонни появился Таск.
Эх, ладно, хорошо, и в этом есть смысл.
A need to one-up others or put them down, while sharing none of the kinder aspects of his character that are usually at the forefront. And all the while, the comic props Jeffrey up, not only as a good dude, but a man, baby. And by the end of the Princess Sally miniseries, he's the one who gets the girl. Because, uh-oh, that's right, it's love triangle time.
Бля.
Yep, just when I was starting to get invested in Sonic and Sally's relationship, it's time to undermine that. Now Sally is able to fulfill her other role in the story as the grand prize of Sonic and Jeffrey's endless pissing contest. And I can't help but feel that Jeffrey should have been disqualified after trying to, I don't know, literally murder Steele that Jeffrey...
Они здесь неправильно перевели.
Да.
Там не в том значении.
Ну, это понятно. Это, ну, это вопросы все к тому, что это автоматический перевод. Это буквально переводится на ходу искусственным интеллектом. Ну, или типа того.
Я понимаю.
Should have been disqualified after trying to, I don't know,
literally
murder...
Ну, бывает.
Sonic?
Учитывая
no,
то,
this
что
isn't me.
Господи, это гениально.
Ну хотя да, учитывая, что он скунс, это действительно великолепно.
Over-exaggerating, Jeffrey, grown man, Saint Teenage Face Sucker John, attempts to murder Sonic. Why? Well, during the campfire issue, Sonic punched him for repeatedly claiming his uncle was a traitor. He's not, by the way. And so Jeffrey decided it was time for death. What could have been an interesting and tense conversation about trust between friends instead is about Jeffrey running in to yell at people for pages on end. And how does Sally respond to all this? Well, everyone has proved their loyalty and time will tell me if I'm wrong. Sally.
Тупая ты, сука. У тебя ебло кривой еще, да? Этот хер пытался убить самого доверенного члена твоей, блядь, компашки защитников. Из-за больших глаз?
Нет, он вообще в целом единственный такой каноник.
What on Mobius are you talking about? Everyone here? Everyone? Jeffrey just tried to kill one of your best friends. What happened to putting the good of the group first? What happened to your affection for Sonic? Seriously, did Robotnik roboticize your brain? It's a shame that in what seems like an attempt to lean into the appeal of Sally's character, the comic instead wound up using her to prop up someone who actively makes the series worse, leaving a bitter taste in my mouth and a foul stench in my nostrils going into the grand finale. So after a whole lot of obnoxious fighting, that's that. The prologue to Endgame is complete, and now we need to see who exactly the big traitor is
Да, это скунс. Честно, я так и чувствую, что это будет ёбаный скунс.
gonna be. And fortunately, a story can still be enjoyable without good setup. Like, sure, this was a bad issue, but come on! It's time for Robotnik versus Sonic, and Robotnik has always been great. Plus, as far as Sally is concerned, this is it, baby! It's time for her and Sonic to take back their home, to take back Sally's kingdom. It's a major conflict with an emotional connection attached. So really, I'm rooting for you, Sally. What could go wrong? The first issue of Endgame goes like this. Sonic and Sally are breaking into Robotropolis while the other freedom fighters watch on. It's revealed that Sally's father, King Max, has suddenly awakened from a coma of sorts, and he immediately starts accusing Sonic of being the traitor. Of course, Sally doesn't believe him, but things quickly change when in the middle of a mission, Sonic seemingly cuts her rope, causing Sally to fall to her... Oh, okay, yeah, that's... Wow. Anyway, while that's happening, Sonic is inside confronting Robotnik, so it can't be him who did it. Still, the rest of the freedom fighters don't know that, and so King Max sentences Sonic to life in prison for the murder of Princess Sally. Now, while most of you probably already know or would assume that Sally isn't actually dead, the fact that she's effectively gone for this entire arc is unfortunate, to say the least, especially after she got sidelined in her own miniseries. Needless to say, though, emotions are running high, with everyone crying and yelling and, oh Nelly, things aren't going well. Sonic is perhaps the most shocked of all, considering that he's done nothing wrong and is still getting a one-way ticket to the devil's gulag. And this premise is, well, aside from what it does to Sally, I kinda like it. It has some similarities to Mecha Madness, where Sonic was wrongly accused of betraying his team and had to go to clear his name. However, back then, Sally...
Честно, как-то слишком часто Сонику, блядь, не доверяют. Меня вот это всегда напрягало, когда есть персонаж, который вроде бы слишком много всего сделал. Прям действительно спас ёбаный мир. Сделал кучу всего. Но люди так легко верят в то, что он мог предать всех. Это бред ёбаный. Это с Человеком-пауком, когда, блин, этот парень спас мир от Таноса вместе с Железным Человеком. Этот чел спас кучу народу в Нью-Йорке. Он жертвовал жизнь несколько раз. Но при этом весь мир поверит какому-то хую с аквариумом на башке по имени Мистерио, который появился на пару дней. И никто даже не знает о том, его полную предысторию. Все поверят в то, что это он его убил, что он был убит Человеком-пауком. Полмира в это поверило. Я до сих пор в эту хуйню не верю. Такая бредятина сраная. Вот, когда, блин, чел, который действительно совершил уже много поступков, но стоит одно говно, причем даже без каких-то там четких доказательств.
Это знаешь, это вот древняя китайская пословица. Ты можешь 1000 раз построить мост и 1 раз пососать хуй, но люди запомнят тебя как сосателя хую.
Вот, кстати, это по факту.
Sally was there to give him the leeway he needed to prove his innocence. But now, with Sally gone, well, we immediately see how much worse Sonic's life is because he's lost the person in power who gave him the benefit of the doubt. Beyond that, Sonic has been isolated from his freedom-fighting friends, so it's clear that this will be his biggest challenge yet. But you might have noticed someone new to this equation. King Max. I've barely mentioned him before, but here he plays a pretty big role. So what gives? Why haven't I focused on him yet? Well, this is where the build-up to Endgame comes into play. See, the overarching goal of almost every issue leading to Endgame is the same. Find King Maximilian Acorn and restore his body back to normal. That's it. Sure, there will be an obstacle for each issue and complications in order to make it more fun, but that's the gist of it. Even Knuckles is here to help since he's such a swell guy. But there's a simple problem. I really don't care about this guy. Honestly, I'm not really sure why he's necessary. Before he came into the equation, Sally was already a fine enough leader. Meanwhile, Sonic and his friends were able to usually come out on top on their own, so what exactly were they lacking that only Max could provide? But that's a pretty cold, distant way to look at this, so what about on a personal level? I mean, this is Sally's dad. Maybe we're supposed to care about Sally and the desire to see a daughter reunite with her father. But again, there are some problems with this. First, we never get a single charming or emotional interaction between Sally and her father, flashback or otherwise. Second, as we've established, Sally is her father. Flashback or otherwise. Second, as we've established, Sally is barely a character anymore and has lost most of her personality. Sure, she's sad about her dad being gone and determined to do something about it, but all she does is exposit. So what should be an emotional conflict ends up just feeling soulless. And that's the worst part of this.
Ну-ка. В какой-то степени.
Since we've spent so much time focused on saving Max, we've diluted the heart and charm of the comic that made me want to see our heroes win in the first place. Next to no time is spent on how they feel anymore, because now all they care about is Max, and the hope that he'll somehow save the day for them. Or at the very least be the final
Ну, там что-то вроде комы такой окаменевший, что-то в этом роде.
thing they need. And that's just not compelling to me. However, you might be thinking, what's the big deal? It's just one character. But even the most novice chef knows that changing one ingredient can ruin an entire meal. Like how removing chili from a chili dog leaves you with nothing but a simple
Чили,
wiener.
собаки с чили.
Speaking of,
Этот перевод, я не могу.
Drago first appears in that campfire issue we went over, and his wolf pack is pretty suspicious of him because he's been wandering off a lot. And no, you didn't mishear, and I didn't misspeak. This is his first appearance. This also isn't some red herring, because Drago is going to be really important in Endgame. So, despite apparently using all these issues for build-up, we have this character who pops out of nowhere and is suddenly super important because, yes, Drago is actually the big bad traitor man we needed to be worried about.
Серьезно? Я думаю все-таки, что Скунс.
Это специально сделано.
Why would I care
Я
about him
уверена,
being
что
the
ты
traitor?
знаешь, это вот очень классный сценарный прием, когда ты вводишь говнючего персонажа, потом ты вводишь, потом ты делаешь конфликт, что типа что компания начинает гадать, кто предатель, все читатели или там кто, зрители думают, что вот этот вот говнючий персонаж, он да, говнючий, поэтому он предатель, а потом оказывается, что предателем является тот, на кого вообще бы не подумали. Это охерительный сюжетный ход, я обожаю.
I don't know this guy. But you know which guy I do know? Antoine. Or at least I thought I did. See, in issue 48, things have gotten bad for our heroes. Sonic has escaped capture and is now on the run from Jeffrey. Meanwhile, Robotnik has arrived in Knothole and is greeted by Max as their new warlord. Uh-oh. Thankfully, this guy pulls out a giant gun on him. It doesn't help, but hey, dude, points for trying. Either way, though, our freedom-fighting friends seem kinda screwed. But my man Antoine is on Drago's case, and he's going to spy on him since he's concerned about what's actually going on here. Great. So Antoine is going to be our connection to the Drago storyline and the reason for me to care about him being the traitor. Maybe this will be the time Antoine is able to cement himself as a hero too, with Drago as his antagonist. Also great. But here's the thing. This isn't Antoine. Not really anyway. Moment-to-moment writing has completely removed everything that made Antoine Antoine. We don't see any worry or panic from him, no real concern or fear that they'll be caught. And those feelings were undoubtedly part of Antoine's personality. Without them, he's just been reduced to some guy. Some guy who's only here so the audience can listen in on Drago's scheme before shuffling him aside. And the same goes for Bunny. But this doesn't come out of nowhere. Nah, this Antoine has been hanging around these parts ever since we finished Mecha Madness, and boy, oh boy, has he been annoying.
I was wondering what you were doing in here on such a nice day.
I am doing nothing that concerns you. Now, if you don't mind, I wish to be alone.
I
can tell when I'm not
В какой-то степени.
wanted. Just wait till I get some stuff to work on.
Thank you for being so observant. Now, if you please, what was so special about this map that father had to hide it in the hilt of his sword? Both maps have one complete side. The ground on the must cave is hiding in the sword. From that part of the city. I shall do this on my own. That big nose little no good map still. I have to tell you this. This is the end for me. I am not going to make it. Let's take a good fight. No, I came here to save us, not ensure that we die. A shame I never find out what's at the under end of the map. Maybe someday.
This is more or less the version of Antoine we find back in Endgame. Sure, he does good things like stand up for his friends, but it's in the most generic, angry man way possible. Remember how Antoine was admirable because he rose to the occasion despite his fears or in order to prove his worth? The one who could have a huge ego, but when push came to shove, could also have a surprising consideration of others' feelings and tried his best to live up to his lofty impression of himself. Yeah, well, I hope you have a good memory because that's changed. Now it's revealed that Antoine was actually always a brave warrior and even saved Bunny's life one time before the events of the comic or something. Then she gives him a smooch. Oh. Okay. Seems familiar, but instead of Bunny's affection for Antoine growing from his moments of courage that we've witnessed in the comic, now it's that she always knew he was brave. Based on an event we're simply told about after the fact. Even his outfit takes on a grander meaning.
Странно, честно, как будто Как будто просто послание нахер того, что он как бы был как бы всегда трусливым, что у него эго затмевало факт того, что он действительно трус. Это странно как-то ощущается, честно.
Now, where Sonic pauses to tell everyone that, as a tribute to his father, Antoine wears his uniform. Sure. Thanks for letting me know that, Sonic. Overall, this section of the comic just seems so desperate to change the reader's perception of Antoine, but never does so in a way that feels earned or satisfying. Even if you disliked who he used to be, I really doubt this would do much for you. Somehow Antoine just turned into someone else. If anything, this is some version of Antoine we would see if Antoine himself wrote a comic when, I already love you just the way you are, buddy. But Antoine isn't alone in being a bland, boring fellow, because, oh no, what did they do to my son?
Еще Наклз пострадал. Да что ж такое, блядь, если есть кто-то, кто не пострадал во всей этой мясорубке, блядь, сценаристкой.
Dad told me of that peak's fateful birthing. Our city's gleaming spires rose high into the sky. Our ambitions...
Они превратили племя в какой-то, блядь, чего?
Our city's...
И это же вообще не вяжется с духом персонажей. Ёб твой насрать.
Как бы даже в играх показывают, что их племя жило в таком, по сути говоря, в обстановке храмов, джунглей.
А еще какого хуя Накл рассказывает, как они счастливо жили с технологией, но при этом они, блядь, как сражаются против чувака, который делает все в технологиях. За...
Тем более, какого хуя? Накл же вообще не доверяет технологиям во многих моментах. Че за нахуй? Это откуда выстроилось вообще? Это все, что я не знаю, блядь. Соник на самом деле не на Мобиусе родился. На самом деле я родился на марсианском затерянном спутнике Жопа. Но потом, когда я был маленький, устроили охоту и планету взорвали, а меня спасли на Мобиусе. Ну это же вообще не имеет никакого смысла, нахуй.
Ну ты только что, по сути, пересказал сюжет первой части Соника.
Ну и Супермена еще. Ну и большинство таких историй, блядь, даже Бегомозга.
Gleaming spires rose high into the sky. Our ambitions touched the stars themselves. Like lemmings, the populace fled out of the city, intent not on evacuation, but excavation. Knuckles, did you just finish up your advanced English course? What are you trying to prove, buddy? This isn't the Knuckles I loved. No, this is a prim and proper narrator with a penchant for flowery language. Writing like this pops up in a lot of his stories and eventually infests the rest of the comic. At a certain point, it's like the narrator just possesses the characters.
Something's going down! Me too! Down to these bushes for cover, that is! Look at that! A giant tube dropping out of the clouds and it's inserted itself into the...
Мы видим это. Вот тоже не понимаю, когда авторы зачем-то, блядь, пытаются расписать каждую,
они,
блядь...
может, на аниме смотрят, там тоже постоянно все повторяется.
Нет, даже не повторяется, а именно прям буквально описывается все. Я понимаю, книга, мы не видим, это книга. Здесь полностью посвящено все тексту, и нам описывают красивый замок, я не знаю, там, спрятался в кустах, в которых, я не знаю, много можжевельника, что-нибудь такое. То есть, нахуй это в комиксах так акцентировать на этом внимание. В этом и смысл, это комикс. Вы можете это показать, а не просто рассказать.
The grotto! Yeah! It's vacuum out the magic rings in the water! But to where? And why?
And it just keeps going. Yeah, that's definitely not Tails Michael Prower. That's the narrator pretending to be Tails. This narrator speak gets really out of hand in this section of the comic, with everyone going on and on about every little thing in unnecessary detail. And I want to be clear that this isn't a complaint about tone, about needing the comic to either be funny or serious. I mean, some of you might recognize this line. For the first time in his life, Sonic truly understands the meaning of war. Now, many balk at this from the get-go. This sort of self-seriousness in my Sonic comic? But honestly, I like it. It's so ridiculous and the art is actually cool enough that I can't help but laugh. And frankly, I don't care if I'm laughing with the
еще с этими кандалами у нас Соник стал рокливее.
Comic or at it or somewhere in between.
Не, он стал
Either way.
Джуга из нам.
Джуга из Намбаки?
Да. Так у него что же?
Точняк.
Self-serious stuff like this can get me giggling and definitely serves as a source of entertainment in the same way Mecha Madness would at certain points. But when taken as a whole, well, that's when things change, because this isn't just a little section here or there. This is the vast majority of the comic now. And since the narrator talks like this, and the characters often talk like the narrator, that means that we've lost the contrast between these likable characters and the over-the-top seriousness that made this entertaining for me. Even the most bland of characters...
В плане. Мы такие же, да. Ну, это да,
то, что типа, ты говоришь, как Я прям слышу тебя.
А, ну да.
Characters have had the life sucked out of them.
Who, pray tell, would have flown the plane back?
Get out of here, guy. But you may have noticed another problem just from looking at the screen. The art. Similar to the writing, individual moments of this might not seem that bad. Actually, some are pretty dang funny in isolation. Really, out of context panels or skimming through an issue can lead to great results. But if you're actually trying to read the full comic, that's where...
Очень странно ощущается, честно говоря. Блять, ну вот король вообще странно. Он же был показан как такой, в принципе, ну все антропоморфные звери. Тут он внезапно, я не знаю, я отрастил дело гигачадов, сосав славянские яйца, я не знаю, с Мобиуса. Чё это за хуйня? Да и все как-то, честно, рисунок стал. Вот после вот этой арки с мехабезумием очень все странно смотрится. Прям, я не знаю, что с рисунком случилось.
Where it becomes a challenge. Take this page, for instance. First you read this panel, then this one, and then... Which one? Well, my eye naturally moves down to this image of Sonic throwing sand, but that's actually incorrect. First, I'm supposed to look at the bottom left, but that's not where my eyes went at all. Then there's Sonic falling here. To me, it feels more natural to read it in this order, you know, like Sonic's getting lower on the page as he goes down. But no, that's also wrong. Instead, Sonic gets higher up on the page as he gets closer to the ground. Sure, I can pretty easily figure out the right order, but there's still a moment of hesitation.
Комиксов и манги, что?
Да, правила понятны, просто порой, когда вот смещается акцент с одной, как говорится, панели на другую. Просто порой авторы очень любят зачем-то выебываться и вставлять, знаешь, такой кружочек вот тут посередине, еще какую-нибудь панельку, чтобы из-за чего это получается как-то запутанное.
Of questioning how I'm supposed to read, and that moment is enough to disrupt any flow the comic has going for it. Because when spots like this pop up enough, I'm left constantly doubting myself, pausing to see if I understood things right. And even when the layouts are fine, there's a good chance I'll have a metric buttload of speech bubbles to contend with. This makes even the best looking stories in this era, like issue 42, a chore to read because of how cluttered everything is. Mooney's expressive artwork creates a really fun and colorful battle between the freedom fighters and this other traitor guy named Sleuth Doggy Dog, who betrayed the resistance for T-Bone.
Sleuth Doggy Dog, господи, звучит как какой-то рэпер из 90-х. Yo, dogs, it's me, Sleuth Doggy Dog. Нет, серьезно, это реально звучит как какой-то дешевый рэпер из 90-х. Какого хрена?
Stakes, which... You know, I get it. Anyway, Knuckles shows up to help. Sonic does this cool maneuver where he creates whirlwinds, and this is the kind of ridiculousness...
так вот откуда разработчики Астрала Блицтеки это взяли. Вот
что он этими, вот, торнадо срет.
Не-не-не, как это, Шептун, он пустил Шептуна.
Блять.
I signed up for. But this cluttered paneling combined with the overabundance of speech bubbles and text covering the pictures makes this issue genuinely tiring to get through. But oh baby, it's time. Because now we've reached the pit that is Sonic.
Бля, кстати, обложка классная.
Ну, блять, это что, это у Анака за второй подбородок, что ли?
Не, ну типа здесь показывает, что типа вот у него именно линия подбородка вот так вот, типа, что он под углом. Из-за того, что у него такая мордочка выпуклая. Не, ну сам рисунок хорош.
Sonic vs. Knuckles Battle Royale. Just I want you to do me a favor and bask in it for a second. What is happening?
Блять, я не знаю, как это описать, очень все странно смотрится. Их как будто всех раздуло.
Как будто, вот знаешь, это как будто детская раскраска.
Смотри. Вы что сделали с моим мальчиком-хамелеоном? Какого Нет, Эспио, за что? Он похож на чибика обосранного какого-то, знаешь, эти дешевые игрушки, блять, из автоматов. Какого хера?
Now imagine also trying to read the boring, self-indulgent dialogue while looking at these flat, garish colors, and at a point it all blurs together to create an
чтобы в вселенной Соника были мифические.
Не, ну именно в СТМской были драконы.
Pleasant reading experience that kinda hurts. Well, this is the worst it gets. So many times I'd be reading an issue that had moments like this and I just have to skim over the dialogue or take breaks in order to get through it. All this is to say that much like with the dialogue and writing style, this isn't a problem that popped out of nowhere in Endgame. Now, the comic had been building to this ever since Mecha Madness, and honestly, hints of it were there before. And it really sucks that one of the comic's strongest attributes, the art, is now one of its most glaring flaws. Heck, eventually the comic starts resorting to things like arrows to guide your eyes to the correct panel, which is basically like putting a band-aid on a gunshot shadow. What are you doing there? We haven't reached issue 90. Yeah! Actually, you know what?
Ой, блядь, уйди.
Thanks, man. Just do it. Just get it over with.
Уйди, противный.
Кстати, у Shadow тоже проблема. Я не знаю, почему-то люди, ну, художники вообще не умеют. Он везде косой.
Не, ну, есть хорошие или... Я не понимаю одного, почему они пытаются сделать вот таким прям оверреактом, то есть он прям перебарщит, переигрывает, что вот... И вот это лицо, где он просто, блядь... Я до сих пор, я не забуду, это такое говно. Что? Я такое чувство, будто, блядь, он понюхал все дерьмово на планете, это просто пришел такой, типа... Я понюхал все. Я понюхал разные телевидения разных стран, самые отвратительные шоу, типа «Беременна в 16». Я понюхал хуже, чего быть не может. Я понюхал раннюю версию Sonic 06 для PlayStation 3 с самыми ужасными багами. Ну, просто ранняя версия Sonic 06, она настолько была, блядь, отвратительна. То есть, когда она только вышла, она настолько имела в себе много багов и ошибок, что люди признавали, что они просто дропали игру нахуй. То есть просто люди выключали консоли, просто клали диск на полку.
Yeah, I guess I forgot to describe what happens in issue 49. Well, Max is actually a robot doppelganger like the fake Sally
Кто бы мог подумать?
From the Jeffrey special, and that's how Robotnik learned their location. Whoa. Meanwhile, Jeffrey keeps chasing Sonic, who calls Dulcie for help. Huh? Who's Dulcie, you ask? Oh, don't be silly, she's only appeared in 2 issues before the Endgame arc, where she's haphazardly dropped in because she's from the show. Either way, she's important, so you better be paying attention, Dragon Breath. Meanwhile, Antoine and Bunny end up in the Down Under jail, where the Down Under freedom fighters are also being held there by Crocbot. Wait, Crocbot,
Он был
sound
уже.
familiar. Oh yeah, last time we saw him, he was with Tails. Tails, where'd my little buddy go? Come on, where are you, Michael? Oh, there he.
Майлз. Ну, типа...
Может, оговорился, но... Блять, опять он... Да помойте вы его, суки!
He's not doing much, but he's there. Tails, the kid who refused to believe his hero could be defeated, and Sonic's endearing best buddy. He's given some shocked reactions, one tearful plea tucked into the side of a page, and then he just does nothing to contribute to the grand finale. You know, it's funny, Tails really didn't have much to say in issue 40 either when Sonic got arrested. But where that
Проще говоря, потихонечку Тейлс начал становиться мебелью.
funny, Tails really didn't have much to say in issue 40 either when Sonic got arrested. But where that story was manic and silly, I feel like in a situation this serious, Tails should have a lot more to say. Guess not. But okay, this disappointment can't continue. No, we're moving on to the final part of Endgame, baby.
Такая херовая история, при этом такие, блин, классные обложки.
The big confrontation. So put that juice in my jam, put those hassles on my La Vistas, and let's do it. And right away, it actually makes a good first impression with how it lays out all the creators' names. So many people were involved in this, and that alone makes this feel like an event, an all hands on deck kind of situation. And there are immediately some things to like in this issue. For example, Robotnik's backstory.
То есть расскажут именно как... ну там же был шуточный больше комикс про это тухлое яйцо.
Idea that this human faction, or Overlanders as they're called, were at war with the Mobians, and that Robotnik, seemingly a criminal of sorts, had to flee from his people and wound up joining the other side. Yeah, I'm down for that. It highlights Max's naivete with how he let Robotnik become their warlord, which allowed this menace to infiltrate their society and destroy it from within. My man's been betraying people for forever, even his own kind, and I love to see it. There are also some cool details here with how we learn that Sonic's Uncle Chuck was the one to save Robotnik's life, and yet Robotnik took advantage of that and every other kindness he received for his own selfish gain. Robotnik continues to make every scene he's in better. He's given the proper amount of focus, and yeah, as usual, he's a joy to watch throughout this entire arc. I mean, we get a scene of Robotnik murdering one of his own kind, and it's even someone he knows. Wow, my man even sleeps like a cool guy. All in all, I've said enough. He's just genuinely a highlight in the endgame storyline.
Ну, короче, понятно. Он, походу, главный такой, знаете, главное идеальное пятно, по сути говоря, во многих комиксах вот про СТМ и раннего Арчи. Он просто, сука, слишком хорош.
Meanwhile, though, Sonic isn't doing so hot as he now contends with Jeffrey and an angry Rad Red who believes that Sonic did in fact murder Sally. After all, he always told her he was no good. Arr. Quite the predicament for our boy Sonic. Now even our good old buddy Knuckles doesn't believe him. How's he supposed to clear his name? Well, dear reader, do you remember Dulcie? That totally incredibly super duper important dragon? Well, it turns out that she is the key to this entire Sonic storyline. Because when Jeffrey, Knuckles, and Sonic are about to duke it out and it looks like Sonic will be captured once and for all.
Just right, I only listen to Knuckles. Серьезно, блядь? Я, конечно, знаю, что он такой, типа, верный ниндзя, но, блядь, не до такой же степени, что он просто тупой, доверчивый хрен. Чё сэспио, блядь?
Dulcie opens her mouth and cries, "Enough! As you know, dragons cannot tell lies. That is why we can sense the purity of truth, and I know Sonic is not lying about being framed." And here's the thing. Everyone believes her. I believe her, don't you? This is the conclusion and solution.
Показать доказательства, не привести какой-то крутой арк, где типа Соник очищает своими. Нет, просто я дракоша, блядь, которая потом будет говорить: нет, маленькая жирная жопа, не ешь растишку. Моя правда. Блядь, я так... Какое же говно. Вот такая хрень во многих сюжетах, когда просто появляется какой-то перс. Я так говорю. А, слушай, ну правда, я ему верю больше, чем своей матери. Как это работает?
To 3 issues of Sonic getting arrested and chased around. But this is far from the only ridiculous plot point in Endgame.
Проще говоря, весь этот пиздец, все недоверие, все, что хорошо было, что развивалось, возможно, к чему-то крутому, крутой завязке и вообще в целом такому финалу. Сила растишки, суки.
Now, I skimmed over it before, but the Snively vision is almost as insane. Oh, what's Snively vision? Well, remember how it looked like Sonic cut Sally's rope? What actually happened is that Drago tricked his girlfriend Hershey the cat, who's only introduced during Endgame, into wearing a Sonic outfit with special goggles that made her see everyone else as Snively. So she didn't know that was Sally. She thought she was offing Snively. It's just logic, elementary 2+2 kind of stuff. Do I need to explain how insane this is? Probably not, but I'm going to take one from the Endgame handbook and explain it anyway. How in the actual blue spheres would Hershey not notice this? Did she only ever look at Sally when she was wearing this contraption? She didn't see multiple Snivelies? She didn't even wonder why she was wearing a full bodysuit. And that's without even going into how utterly unsatisfying it is for Sally Acorn to seemingly die and get kicked out of her own story by 2 brand new characters using a plot device that is dumb even for this comic. Now, to be fair, Mecha Madness also ended with a Deus Ex Machina that saved Sonic's life. A contrivance, if you will. But the difference is that Mecha Madness was so absurd and over the top that it felt natural to end it in a similarly crazy way, with the added bonus of pulling from...
Ну, это простительно, потому что он, в принципе, историю, ну, судя по рассказам, вел действительно достойно и дожимал ее в многих вещах, ну, реально до такого достойного предела.
...a past issue to make it feel like it at least had some setup. The story was also fun, so that helped. Absurdity and ridiculous antics have always been with the comic. It's that extra spice that smooths over a lot of things I could nitpick or complain about and makes it clear that the comic wants me to have fun and not sweat the details. But the sad reality of these issues is that, while it's still conceptually over the top, thanks to everything we've discussed, that absurdity is now annoying or bland or no longer acceptable. Before, we were mainly telling jokes, and the serious stuff was just the side dish, so it was fine. But now, first and foremost, this is a serious story with serious narration and serious characters and serious things. And that means I need stuff to make sense. That I can get invested in the stakes of these stories and that some random plot device dragon won't just fly in and make everything else pointless.
Don't see the dragon. She's a sad, unhappy gal. She can sense the truth, but she won't help you take her putrid boyfriend down.
Честно, вот почему-то от появления драконихи у меня одно ощущение. Какого хера мы попали в мультик про Мишигами?
О, да-да-да, такой же чувак.
Oh no. Don't see the dragon, abandoned by her
А, да мы поняли уже.
I'm home, Mom.
So what happens from here? Well, Antoine and Bunny escape from the Down Under prison and they go to help Sonic destroy Robotnik's ultimate annihilator before it fires and destroys a knothole. Sounds important, right? Wrong, because they fail their mission. In the end, they place the bomb too late and the Ultimate Annihilator goes off anyway. Really, they're so ineffectual that the original version of this issue almost entirely cut their story, and you can barely tell it's missing. Meanwhile, Tails and this guy get 1 page of them escaping from Knothole. They get to rescue and help some randos in the background, and that's it for them. Aw, but Tails said to do it for Sally. Life freedom, life freedom. Yay. All of this solidifies what's been clear for a while now. Our heroes, the ones I've spent so much time with that I cared about, they don't matter. Now instead we've got Drago, traitor to the wolf pack and the bad boy heartthrob of Hershey, the kitty cat queen and bad girl supreme. This chick, the speaker of truth who keeps the plot running, and of course Jeffrey St. John, the man's man in a man's war and a character who was definitely meant to spark something in a certain princess and definitely spark something in me, mate. These are our heroes, boys and girls.
Почему мне не должно быть насрать? Почему не должно быть на вас насрать? Почему? Почему? Скажите, кто вы, блядь, такие? Я читаю, как бы, люди хотят читать комикс про Соника, они, если бы хотели бы, то, само собой, рейтинги поднялись бы на такого, что пошли бы письма, пошел бы отклик от зрителей, но нахуй, блядь, делать вот такой вот уклон от главных персонажей к эпизодическим, которые с собой-то, по сути, ничего интересного не несут. В чем, сука, смысл? Ну, в том, что я хочу сжечь этот комикс. Либо просто положить его на полку и забыть о нем нахер.
The key players, the real focus of this story, running right alongside Sonic the Hedgehog himself and actually in front of him. I guess I can include Sally too, since her being dead is pretty important, but that also means she's, you know, dead. So she's truly been reduced to nothing more than a plot device. Heck, Hershey the freaking pussycat gets 3 whole pages dedicated to her getting revenge on Drago, crying about how she was used and how sorry she is, and why is she the one getting all this personal focus here? Who are you? Even when our heroes appear to be doing things throughout this arc, it all amounts to little more than busy work so that we can focus on the actual important characters that progress things. And we don't even get much out of these guys either. Hershey is probably the biggest exception to that. I mean, what's Jeffrey do when he finds out that he was wrong to try and capture Sonic? Oh, I'm sorry. Except he doesn't even say that stinky piece of crap. Thing in Endgame feels so distant. So impersonal. And because of that, none of this really matters to me anymore. In fact, nothing has actually mattered for a while now. You know, King Max, how his only role in the story is getting replaced by one of Robotnik's bots. Well, what happened to the real Max then? After all of these issues, they were spent on self-serious stories about bringing Max back, with the ways we went about doing that either being ill-defined at best, nonsensical at worst, and never accomplishing anything always. That's right. The goal of everything leading to Endgame was actually a farce. We did not restore Max and accomplish nothing right before Endgame just happens to happen. Which means the real Max is still in his crystallized form. Magic rings, magic emeralds, magic swords. It doesn't matter. Actually, magic swords. Magic swords, that's right. Wait. Oh, it's all gonna work out because God told Knuckles that he has to just kill Sorcerer Man Damocles.
Куда? Это что так какие, блядь? Куда бы я попал? Какого хера?
So he goes to do that, and this horseman shows up and saves Knuckles and murders some lady, and then just leaves. Bye, horseman. And Knuckles is explaining what's happening, even though I can see it, and blah blah blah. He punched this guy under cloth, fake magic trick. But kind of funny. I like you, Knuckles. Like bam. It only took 5 issues, but we got the Sword of Acorns. Now we can restore Max. Oh.
What an actual fuck. Не, знаете, ребят, бреда, сука, слишком много. Вот, ладно бы оно как-то развивалось бы в пределах вот этой вот шпионской миссии с недоверием, с выяснением этого чувака Драга, Херш, вот этой кошечки, блять, но в итоге это... Блять, я начал терять просто нить повествования, это какой-то просто шизанутый бред.